Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you for your company this Friday evening. It is just absolutely heartbreaking. It is horrendous, the news from Israel and what has happened there. We'll be talking about the grief and the unbelievable heartbreak of Yarden Bibas, and that is because of what has happened to his family. And what he knows and what he didn't know 48 hours ago was that the corpse that came back to Israel that was supposed to be of his wife wasn't actually his wife. He also knows from forensic testing, unlike the lies that Hamas terrorists have told, we know that his two children, who were a 10-month-old baby and a 4-year-old, were strangled to death. It is just absolutely unspeakable, but we're going to speak about it, and we're going to shine a light on this, and we're going to ask the question about how on earth Israel now deals with Hamas, the state of the ceasefire, and also the implications here at home. I was doing a quick search just before I came on air of Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana, Ayub Khan, Adnan Hussein, Richard Bergen, the usual pro-Palestinian, often, sometimes, many would argue apologists for what has gone on there, apologists for what Hamas is doing, some would argue. They might deny that, but certainly they are on the Palestinian side, and there has been absolutely no condemnation of what has happened in the last 48 hours from those people. We also know from the BBC that they're under fire because of a documentary. They've changed their tune a number of times on this. There are 3, 4 actually contradictory statements that say slightly different things about why a documentary has now been pulled from the iPlayer. It was narrated by the son of a senior Hamas terrorist official. It is just dreadful what is happening. There are many other things we're going to talk about in this show. We'll talk about Rachel Reeves and Jonathan Reynolds and his CV and Angela Rayner. We'll talk about the what's happening in Ukraine. We'll talk about the sport. We'll make sure we talk about what's happening with City Khan in London and problems for motorists. There's a lot we're going to talk about between now and 7, but the main thing we're going to talk about, because I think we have to talk about it, is what is going on in the Middle East, how it affects us here at home, how it affects them there, and just the horrendous, heartbreaking grief, the actions of Hamas terrorists, and how we can ever take them seriously as a force. They're a terrorist group, they're a murderous, genocidal group that wants Israel to be destroyed. How can peace ever actually be achieved there? I want your thoughts on all of this. 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. You can follow me at Peter Cardwell. Send me a voice note, send me a WhatsApp text message, or give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Well, Yarden Bibas is the person I was mentioning. He is, I just can't even imagine what he is going through today, because Shiri Bibas was his wife. He, first of all, Yarden, was abducted, and his wife Shiri was abducted with their 2 young sons, Ariel and Kafir, who were then 4 years old and 9 months old. We can see, if you're looking on the screen now, a photo of that beautiful boy, Ariel, the little 4-year-old boy. So the husband was taken as a hostage separately. The wife and 2 sons were taken as hostages. Shiri and the 2 young sons were killed whilst in captivity. We know that, and we know that their bodies were supposedly given back yesterday. What we now know from forensic information that the Israelis have established is that actually the body that was brought back was not even Shiri Bibas, so her body is still with Hamas terrorists. We also know the 2 young boys. We're talking about a 4-year-old and a 9 or 10-month-old, depending on when they were murdered by Hamas terrorists. They were strangled to death, and then to try to make it appear as if they died in an Israeli airstrike, their bodies were mutilated. What goes through the minds of people who do that to a baby, a 10-month-old baby, to a 4-year-old, to a toddler? It just, it's almost unspeakable. I know I'm talking a lot, but I'm trying to find the words to actually describe this and describe my horror at this and what is actually going on. Well, earlier today, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Hamas terrorists will pay the full price for this cruel and evil violation of what is now an incredibly shaky ceasefire.
These perfect children again were 4 years old and less than 1 year old when the Hamas savages snatched them from their mother's arms. She fought like a lioness to protect her boys. Just imagine their horror. Imagine their confusion. Perfect little children who never hurt a soul. A baby, for the love of God. They languish in captivity until Hamas murdered them in cold blood. Who kidnaps a little boy and a baby and murders them? Monsters, that's who. These Hamas monsters also cynically refused to bring back the boy's mother, Shiri, and sent the body of a Gazan woman instead, in brazen violation of the agreement. Today, the heavens shake. The entire civilized world should condemn these horrific murders. The entire civilized world should join Israel in demanding the immediate release of all the hostages. All of Israel is united in grief. And as the Prime Minister of Israel, I vow that I will not rest until the savages who executed our hostages are brought to justice. They do not deserve to walk this earth. Nothing will stop me. Nothing.
That's the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and the spokesman for the army, Daniel Hagari, the army in Israel, said the terrorists murdered Ariel as well, and Kafir to give a bit more detail on this.
Following a forensic examination, we can confirm that baby Kfir Bibas, aged just 10 months old, and his older brother Ariel, aged 4, were both brutally murdered by terrorists while being held hostage in Gaza, no later than November 2023. These two innocent children were taken hostage alive together with their mother Shiri from their home on October 7, 2023. Contrary to Hamas's lies, Ariel and Kfir were not killed in an airstrike. Ariel and Kfir Bibas were murdered by terrorists in cold blood. The terrorists did not shoot the two young boys. They killed them with their bare hands.
They choked them to death. They choked two very young children to death. That's what happened. And I want to talk to a range of people on all of this. As always, we're the home of free speech. I will talk to basically anybody who wants to make their point clear. But I'm just going to be absolutely clear now at 4:09 that over the next 3 hours, I'm not going to allow any whataboutery from guests about this. What about this tragedy? What about this tragedy? I know that the deaths of all children in Israel and in Gaza are absolutely terrible. They shouldn't happen. I wish they never happened. I wish that everyone could live in peace. What I do know is that on this occasion today, we are talking about the deliberate and horrific murder of babies at the bare hands of Palestinian terrorists. They were taken by civilians. Who murdered them? Civilians or Hamas terrorists? That's what I want to know. I also want to know what a number of people think about this, including the Zara Sultanas, Jeremy Corbyns, Richard Bergens and others of this world. They have often made it clear that their view is that Palestinian children have been slaughtered, and that is a perfectly legitimate view to have if they believe that, and they're free to make that clear. But what do they think of this? As I say, I went on Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana, Richard Bergen, Ayub Khan and Adnan Hussein. There are 5 MPs who are 5 of the most pro-Palestinian MPs. Not a single one of them has a word of condemnation about what has happened over the last 48 hours. If I'm wrong on that, tell me. Show me the evidence. Let's talk to Yaakov Katz. He's a former editor of the Jerusalem Post and a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute. Yaakov, what happens now in all of this? I'm sure you're as absolutely outraged as I am, but where on earth do the Israeli government go from here in terms of this ceasefire? Do we still think, for example, that the 6 hostages that are meant to be returned tomorrow will be returned?
I mean, let me just say that the way you put it was as so eloquent, and your description of just how this is horrific. There are no excuses. There's no whataboutism when it comes to murdering two innocent little angelic boys with the red hair, Ariel and Kfir. There's no way to speak and talk your way out of doing something like this. And this just underscores, I think, the enemy that Israel is facing, the enemy that invaded our country on October 7th, murdered over 1,200 people, took another 251 hostage, including Shiri and her two boys, and Yardain, their father, who has since returned to Israel last week. But this is something that just shows once again who we are up against and how this need to eliminate Hamas, to prevent it from being the ruler of Gaza, is just so existential. It's so important, and not just for Israel, because this type of monster, this type of barbarity needs to be eradicated for the safety and security of the entire world. But there's no question that when we think about tomorrow, when 6 living hostages are meant to come home, Israel is still very hopeful that those people who we can still bring back, we will be able to bring back. And that is the purpose of continuing with this deal, despite the horrific pain and tragedy and sorrow that an entire nation now feels over just what happened to these boys and the news that we received today with the forensic evidence, but also with the cynicism of how do they bring back a body that is not Shiri Bibas? They know we will test it. They know we will discover. If they don't have the body, why don't they just say they don't have the body? They do this because they want to continuously pierce the hearts of the Israeli people.
It is psychological torture of a people. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about language as well, because one person who has sent a message into this programme, Luke, says, "Good afternoon, Peter. What awful and horrific news from the Middle East. You said you were struggling to find the words to describe the murder of the 2 babies. The word you're looking for is evil. My thoughts and prayers are with the father and other family members." And I actually just want to ask you, Yaakov, because I think Netanyahu is actually wrong to use the word monsters to talk about the murderers. It's almost a silly word for creatures that don't exist. These children were murdered by people who are genocidal Jew haters. They're intent on destroying Israel and eradicating all Jews. That is their stated aim.
No, I totally agree. I mean, if anything, to call them human monsters, but the moment we say monsters or animals, we're writing them off as if they're something. They're not like you or I, Peter. They are, unfortunately. They are like us. They're people with heads and noses and 2 arms and 2 legs. And something has caused them to have such hatred, with such passion, that they're willing to take their arms, those 2 hands, and wrap them around the neck of a baby and strangle that baby to death for no reason except out of a pure hatred for the Jewish people and for the people of Israel. What does the murder of Kfir Bibas or Ariel Bibas do? Does that help bring forward and advance Palestinian statehood? Does it bring peace to the region? Does it give more independence to the people of Gaza? Does it somehow undermine the security and safety of the state of Israel? No, it does none of that. All it does is make at least us more emboldened as a country. And I think people who are like our allies, Peter, like yourself, who said it so perfectly, it makes all of us more emboldened that we have to defeat Hamas. Hamas has to be taken down.
Yeah, it's fascinating as well in regard to the deafening silence of many organisations right around the world who have so much to say about so many different conflicts, so many different things, and particularly Gazan children. And that's okay. That's fine to make your views heard about that. But we're going to have a little look, actually. I'm going to talk to the people behind the scenes here who are very busy people, but it's worth checking. In relation to this story, UN Secretary General, Save the Children, Amnesty, the Red Cross, have they condemned this? Have they said these are children, this is what these organisations do? Perhaps they could let us know, because often it seems to me, from where I'm sitting in London, that an Israeli life is seen as less than another life, as particularly if it's a Palestinian life by many in the West. And I wonder what you think of that.
Peter, every loss of civilian life, definitely of a child, I agree with what you said before, is a tragedy. And it's a tragedy whenever someone is killed, whether it's on the Gaza side or the Israeli side. And what's happened in Gaza is tragic for the people of Gaza. I think it's the responsibility, and it's due to what Hamas has done and the way it invaded Israel and the way it fights. But you're so right. When we look out at the world and we see silence, you mentioned Corbyn and others in the UK, silence, right? Where is their outrage? How is it that they are not speaking up? And unfortunately, I think back to Jewish history. And unfortunately, throughout Jewish history, Jewish blood has always been cheap to people around the world. Whether it's a child or it's an older man like Oded Lifshitz, 85 years old.
A peace activist.
Yes, a peace activist. He would stand at the border. He would take his own car and drive Palestinians from Gaza to Israeli hospitals. That was the type of person that he was. And they murdered him. They murder peace. So this is about how, unfortunately, and it's really painful to say this, but the blood of Jews is just not seen to be something of value to many people still around the world.
Yaakov, we're going to talk in more detail later in the programme about the BBC. I'm sure you're familiar with the documentary they have now pulled from their catch-up service, the iPlayer. They've changed their mind on a number of different occasions. We've had 3 or possibly 4 separate statements over the past few days. What we do know is that the son of a senior Hamas, I don't even want to call him official, terrorist, someone in the Hamas infrastructure of Gaza, was the narrator of this. The BBC initially said that it was fine, then they said they weren't told, now they've pulled it from the iPlayer. How big a story is this in Israel? Obviously there's so many other things going on. We've seen those horrendous bus bombings as well in the last 24 hours. Is this on the radar of people in Israel? Are they aware of it?
I mean, Israelis are definitely a little more preoccupied at the moment with what's happening with the Bibas family, what's going to happen tomorrow with the release, hopefully, of the 6 living hostages who are to come home. And of course, those series of bus bombings late last night, which again, just takes us back. I was thinking back to when I was a kid in high school and I was afraid to go on buses. I immediately called my kids and I said, guys, don't go on buses tonight. This is not safe. We had bus bombings in the 90s, in the 2000s, and unfortunately, it's something that's still with us. But to the question about the BBC, I think what we see once again, and this ties into what we were speaking about before, is how people are just willing to become a mouthpiece and give a platform to this Hamas misinformation and the Hamas narrative and ignore all the warning signs, to use the son of a Hamas, what they call deputy minister of agriculture, but really, like you said, a Hamas terrorist, and to whitewash it and make it seem as if this is someone who's not biased and objective, is just undermines all rules and ethics and the integrity of anything that's supposed to be journalistic. And we've seen this so often throughout the last 16 months, the way media around the world parrot with the Hamas, with the Gaza Health Ministry. That's what they call it.
The
right?
Gaza Health Ministry, yeah.
Hamas Health Ministry.
And especially when it comes to the figures as well. I mean, we don't believe Putin. We don't believe Wikipedia. We check that as journalists. Why do we take what Hamas say as gospel? Listen, thank you, Yaakov. It's been interesting talking to Yaakov Katz there, who's a former editor of the Jerusalem Post. He's also a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute. Lots of messages coming in and phone calls as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Hannah in Bournemouth has called. Hannah, what would you like to say? You're very welcome to the programme.
Hi, thank you. I'm just really devastated. It's heartbreaking. Those poor babies, all of them, they were just innocent and they didn't deserve this. And I know I heard the speaker just now saying that they are all peaceful, especially the elderly man. He was driving them to hospital. And in fact, all of that camp they went into was peaceful. They wanted peace. Yeah. It's like most Israel do. They don't want fighting. They protect their children. They protect their family, and it hurts them when, especially Israeli and Gazan children, get hurt in this. But unfortunately, Hamas just wants to use them as human shields, and they don't care. They love it, and they're celebrating.
It's worse than not caring. They actively want the death toll to be higher because they know that'll be a propaganda victory, Hannah.
Yeah, it was just, and then they did those explosions, wanting more death today. I mean, thank God they got it wrong, but I don't understand. They're not evil people, and you know, I'm so sorry to say this, but because of the way things are now, I am of the Jewish faith, but I'm going to hide their identity. It just feels. Can't do it. You just can't.
A lot of people, I think, feel the same way as you, Hannah, and have done that and are hiding their identity when no one of any faith should have to hide their identity. Hannah, thank you for talking to me today, and I wish you and your family well. There's lots more to talk about on this. We have a lot of calls, texts and tweets coming in on it. We are going to talk about it right throughout the show. We're also going to talk in a minute about Ed Miliband's ambitious pledge to deliver 650,000 green jobs. Is he going to do it? Tony Blair says no. Stay with us.
What we have seen is people from Albania, for crying out loud, creating gangs, coming over, exploiting our welfare system, making fake accounts and sending... I mean, we don't know the millions that they managed to defraud the welfare state from. So what can we do?
When I read it the first time, I thought, I can't agree with this. But it is true that if you spread your money around a whole load of bank accounts and not just have it in one or two banks, well, it starts to get a little bit tricky.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
I want to talk to Baroness Bennett now, Natalie Bennett, who's the former leader of the Green Party, because Ed Miliband's vow that Britain will see a green jobs bonanza has actually been rubbished by Sir Tony Blair's think tank. The Net Zero chief, Ed Miliband, says that 650,000 jobs will be created by 2030 in the pre-election manifesto. Now, the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change says it's more likely to be something like 350,000 people. Baroness Bennett, welcome to Talk this afternoon.
Lovely to be with you, Peter.
Before we get into this story, I'm sure you would want to condemn the actions of Hamas terrorists in regard to the Bibas family.
I think it's absolutely terrible what the Bibas families are going through, and the absolute greatest sympathy with them for what they're suffering, and indeed for all the families of the hostages. I went to a meeting at the House and heard from some of the hostages' families, and all we can say is our heart totally goes out to them for what they're going through.
Thank you for that. On this particular story, it seems that there'll be far fewer green jobs than we expected there to be. What do you make of this?
Well, I think this is, it's worth looking at the source of this story, which is the Sir Tony Blair Institute, which is, like its titular head, very much stuck in the 20th century. And this report is very much focusing on manufacturing jobs and talking about the challenges which undoubtedly exist in terms of the difficulties of manufacturing electric cars in the UK, the difficulties and the challenges of manufacturing solar panels or wind turbines. What this doesn't really focus on is some of the actions that we desperately need to take, both in terms of cutting our carbon emissions, but also in terms of public health. The big thing is the cleanest, greenest, best possible energy you can have. The greenest job you might think of is insulating homes, ensuring everyone has a warm, comfortable, affordable to heat home, and cuts their. But this report doesn't really focus on that.
There is this crossover period, though, isn't there, Natalie, where you've got to have the backup for fossil fuel power as well as the renewables at the same time. You can't have one without the other. And also in the future we have, it's just a fact that the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow.
No, and there are plenty of solutions to that. One of the interesting ones being what's known as vehicle to grid, whereby we can actually use electric cars as part of the storage for the grid. And that's something that's the kind of technology that actually also helps people. Again, people get paid for that. So
what about small nuclear reactors?
No, I can guarantee to you that small nuclear reactors are not going to happen in the UK. I'm afraid it's
not going to happen.
No.
Why is that?
Because it's totally an unproven technology. It's not been delivered. We've seen how nuclear is incredibly expensive and incredibly slow, and all the issues that our existing new nuclear plants that we're going to get. There's a
lot of research and development going into it. The government seems to be putting a lot of stall, or you clearly believe they're wrong to do so.
And they're also very much wrong to be putting money into carbon capture and storage, which is a technology that is simply failing all around the world, has failed to deliver. If you take the case study of somewhere of a plant in Canada where it was supposed to be collecting 90% of the carbon dioxide and is collecting less than 60% of the carbon dioxide. The government is focusing on these big, shiny technological solutions when what they should be doing is looking at warm, comfortable, affordable to heat homes for everyone, insulation, low carbon heating for homes, and also things like green jobs, buses. We're seeing a massive collapse in bus services, particularly in some of the poorest areas of the country. Driving a bus, restoring a bus service, that's a green job that's absolutely crucial to people.
I'm delighted you're talking about buses, because I mean the vast majority of journeys in this country are done by car, but if you use public transport you're likely to use a bus, and you wouldn't know that from the London centric media that goes on and on and on and on about the trains, which are rubbish, but nonetheless buses are something I love talking about and we should talk more about it. Natalie, just a final question. How many green jobs do you predict will actually be created by 2030?
Well, of course, it depends absolutely on what steps the government takes. And what we're still waiting to hear is that the key action, as I've been focusing on, is insulation, home energy efficiency. We've got a cost of living crisis. To cut people's bills by ensuring they've got a warm, comfortable, affordable to heat home. Those are jobs, and they're jobs that are distributed right around the country. They're jobs that have a real opportunity for small businesses to set up, to get going if we have stable long-term government policies that people can trust and rely in. There's decades of work to be done in insulating our homes, and everyone benefits. And we've got a real problem with public health. Everyone's focusing on how many people of working age are ill. Giving them healthy homes is just one more step to really tackle that, as well as the climate benefits and the cost of living benefits.
Natalie, thank you. That's Baroness Bennett, Natalie Bennett, who's the former leader of the Green Party. That's on Ed Miliband's ambitious pledge to deliver 650,000 green jobs by 2030. I'd be very surprised if it happened. I'd be very surprised if 350,000 people, which is what the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change says will happen. Just on the main story we're covering today in regard to the Bibas family and the absolute horror that has been visited on them by Hamas terrorists. Cliff in Berkshire says it brought tears to my eyes hearing the details of the children and their mother, and I can only hope that I shall never feel how the father is feeling right now. I was appalled watching the crowds coming to gloat over the procession of the tiny coffins yesterday. Sadly, it has made me ask myself whether Hamas could be destroyed without committing genocide against the people of Gaza, because it looks like the views and thinking of Hamas are not alien to the residents of Gaza. How can a human being become so hateful for people they have have never met. Well, Cliff, thank you. That is a very, very good message. What I should say is that we are continually and inaccurately told that there is a genocide in Gaza. There is not. Factually, that is wrong. And what happens in a genocide, the generally accepted definition of a genocide, is that if a quarter of a population is eradicated or, killed, essentially. That hasn't happened. In fact, the population of Gaza is higher than it was on the 7th of October. So don't believe the lies. Don't believe the propaganda. Hear the truth. This person says, why aren't Muslim leaders standing up and condemning Hamas? John Roberts in Germany says, well, that's actually about something different, but Stephen Ipswich says, it is terrible what's happened over this latest horrendous news for those poor Israeli families. What makes it even worse and unacceptable is that the creatures that come out in London every week will continue to do so and try to make excuses for the actions of these animals. There is no excuse. Steve, remember that as the 7th of October atrocities were taking place, the Palestine Solidarity Committee was asking the Metropolitan Police to hold a protest the next week. This was as people were, as these children and their mother and their father actually separately were being kidnapped, taken hostage by Hamas terrorists. The people who walk on the streets of London, who are in many cases in support of what Hamas is doing. And what are they doing? They're tearing families apart. They still have 60 hostages, 504 or odd days on. It is just unspeakable what has happened, but we are going to continue to speak about it because we absolutely have to and we must. These are terrorists who would choke a baby to death. That's what they would do, and they think this advances their cause. We'll talk about the Labour Party in a second. They're in all sorts of trouble. A number of members of the Cabinet and questions about their CVs. We also know that Andrew Gwynn, the former Health Minister, is now under investigation by Parliament standards. Watchdog. We'll talk about that, but we will come back very shortly to your calls about this, and there are a lot of calls about the Bibas family, and we will make sure that all perspectives are represented. But I also will be taking absolutely no nonsense on this today. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Amanda in London, who says it's one thing firing a missile, but to physically strangle 2 small children is beyond human understanding. Completely agree with you. Rachel says, I'd like to say it amazes me that the usual pro-Palestinian journalists on social media are not referring to the evil of the savage Hamas over recent days, but they don't. They continue to attack Israel. Thank you for continuing to highlight the truth of the horrors of Hamas and the plight of the real victims, the Israeli hostages. Paula in Cheshire says, these beautiful souls were taken in a barbaric way, yet Starmer's government allows protests in London, shouting abuse at people who don't support Hamas. These protests need to stop. Finally on this, just for the moment, we will return to it in about 10 minutes or so. This person says, please ask your listeners to send a message of love to their Jewish friends. Jews are suffering and in grief right now. Well, I've actually done that today to one of my Jewish friends, it must be said. And I would urge you to as well. Let's talk about the Labour Party. They're under fire for a number of reasons. There are now 3 cabinet ministers over whom there are questions about their CVs. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary, and most recently Angela Rayner as well, about how long she was actually a care worker, and a few questions about what her CV actually contains. Now, Andrew Gwynn as well, who is in a slightly different category because he was a health minister, he was sacked for his WhatsApps. And I mean, there are all sorts of horrendous things that he had written in this particular WhatsApp group. That was a couple of weeks ago. And he said he hoped a 72-year-old woman would soon be dead after she wrote to her local councillor about bin collections. And he also joked about a constituent being mown down by a truck in the messages, which he said he regretted as badly misjudged. Yeah, there's a lack of excrement there, Sherlock. Let's talk to James Mathewson, who's a former Labour spokesman. James, you're very welcome to the programme. Firstly, on Andrew Gwynn, we know that the MP for Gordon and Denton has lost the whip. He's been essentially chucked out of the Labour Party. He's now an independent. And Parliament's website says the investigation relates to the actions causing significant damage to the reputation of the House as a whole or its members generally. Should he resign?
I would if I were him, and I think it would be the decent thing to do. I think at this point, because of the amount of evidence against him, and just generally a lot of these things are on the line between, you know, what's acceptable legally and what's just decent and what's indecent. And I think really when you look at the wording and the way that he said things, there's been a lot of people, by the way, in the Labour Party very shocked and very surprised, because Andrew Gwynn's always been quite a mild-mannered, quite a relaxed kind of guy. I had to, you know, do a double take when the first kind of WhatsApp comments were released that Andrew Gwynn had made. I worked with him quite closely. I know other people who worked with him quite closely. And other than the Boris Johnson wrestling incident, which some of your viewers may have seen back in the day.
Don't worry, we've played that one in the last few days as well, James.
I thought you might have.
The old hits were certainly shown. Yeah, that was a very strange piece of television. Yeah.
Yeah, other than that, I mean, he'd really been under the radar, you know, and served in several shadow cabinets, and then obviously as a minister. So, yeah, it makes sense to me that he would say, okay, look, I've clearly made those comments, and if he's made those comments, as he doesn't seem to be denying making them, then it seems right that he would step down.
I wonder what, I mean, there just seem to be so many different allegations in regard to Jonathan Reynolds. Now we have the Solicitor's Watchdog saying that it's a fresh statement today. This is the Solicitor's Regulation Authority. We looked at the issue at the time, we became aware of it and contacted Jonathan Reynolds about the profiles. These are the online profiles, things like LinkedIn and so on. The materials were corrected and we closed the matter and no further action based on all the evidence we had at the time. However, we've now become aware of further information, so we will look into this. Robert Jenrick, surprise, surprise, the Shadow Justice Secretary, saying that they must investigate, as is critical to maintaining public confidence in the profession. He would say that, wouldn't he? But you have HMRC urged to investigate Rachel Reeves's bank expenses, Angela Rayner's CV under scrutiny here. I'm not sure every single person watching and listening to this programme may know all the details. In fact, I don't know all the details of all of this, but there's a general impression left, isn't there? And it's not a good one of the Labour Party.
That's why it's happening, and it's all the Daily Mail. Each one of those stories has come from the Daily Mail, and they do this. It's kind of a well-trodden narrative. And look, the left wing
don't lie on your CV, you know.
Government, you know, they do these kind of one after another stories where they refer to them, and you know this, as campaigns that they'll run over a long period of time, because there's always a question around scrutiny and transparency and discrepancies of information around the place. When it comes to Angela Rayner's case, I mean, I've looked at that, and from everything I can see and the things Angie said over time, the differences in different profiles publicly seem to just be about her working for private contractors to the council and for the council directly. That's the difference there. So, things like that can just be cleared up very easily. But the whole point is the Daily Mail wants to try and create this atmosphere of...
they allege, the paper alleges that the Deputy Prime Minister's recollection of how long she worked as a home help has ranged from 7 to 17 years on 4 separate occasions.
Yeah, which is ridiculous. Of course, nobody's recollection is 10 years out, is it? It's the fact is that on...
Rachel Reeves said she worked for the Bank of England for the best part of a decade when it turned out to be 5.5 years.
But the thing is, when you come to it and you look at the specifics of Angela Rayner's case, which is the one I've looked at here, it says that, she's worked for Stockport Council directly or she's worked for a contractor for them. So technically for the council for that whole period, but of course through different means and through different mediums. So there's nothing really of huge concern. The Daily Mail, I think, wants to really hold itself in check because, there are far bigger questions to be asked. They've not run a single story about Nigel Farage taking over 600 grand from second jobs since being an MP. So we all know it's politically motivated.
He's been transparent about that. He's declared all that.
Great, it's still morally reprehensible.
Why is it morally reprehensible to have a second job? Loads of MPs have second jobs.
Yeah, and it's morally reprehensible. And the fact that he spent more time in America and all the rest. The point is that they're attacking people in the Labour government. Of course they are, because
they are the government.
That's their job.
That's fair enough.
It's not just that, Peter. It's the fact that the Daily Mail, they are ideologically opposed to the Labour government. That's their job.
Maybe, and they're coming from a certain perspective, but also if they're telling the truth, if they're exposing truths, I don't care whether it's the Guido Fawkes website or the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, or whether it's the Guardian. If they're saying this is a person who says, for example, in the case of the Chancellor, I worked for the Bank of England for the best part of a decade, and it was actually 5.5 years, and there's a bit of a cloud over a few other things. I want to know that.
The funny thing is, the level of scrutiny on Rachel Reeves that we've seen, as opposed to the level of scrutiny on some of our former chancellors, people who have been far less qualified for the job than Rachel Reeves. People who
but she said she was an economist and she made the claim. She made the claim.
She is an economist, and she was at the Bank of England. So there's nothing.
Not for the best part of a decade.
Well, what's the best part of a decade? This is the problem with these whole debates. I don't know Rachel Reeves' life inside out. Only she does.
But does she, though? Because she's given quite a number of different recollections of what it actually is.
Great. I just think it's really small potatoes, to be honest, when we're talking about the wider scheme of things. And of course,
so it's okay to tell small lies, then, is it?
People would say, no, I don't think they're lies, Peter. I think people think these issues are cut and dry and very straightforward. But I think if they got into the positions of power, if you or I or anyone else...
If you say I'm a solicitor and you haven't qualified as a solicitor, that is a lie.
Yeah, but that's not what's happened here.
It is. He said to Parliament, I was a solicitor. He wasn't.
But it's not that straightforward. These claims
it is, though, because you're either a solicitor or you're not. It's a bit like being pregnant.
As long as they're looked at by the right people and the right people say there's no case to answer. Now, of course, every time a new bit of evidence or information comes up, because they're reported by people, of course, they're rightly looked at. But as long as they're looked at by the right bodies and the right entities who regulate and keep an eye on these kind of things and monitor them, that's all right. But, it's not the Daily Mail launching some moral crusade here, let's be honest.
Well, there were moral crusades launched by various people like Keir Starmer, for example, saying that he wanted a very transparent and completely straightforward government. Listen, we can argue, I think what we can agree, James, is that it's not small potatoes, but it's not the most serious issue we're dealing with today. The most serious issue we're dealing with today, as we've been talking about at various stages and will continue to between now and 7 o'clock, is what's happened to the Bibas family in Israel and what has and the absolute horror that has been visited upon them and the continuing psychological torture of them. And I mean, we've been checking, the people behind the scenes have been checking. There are a lot of the usual suspects. There's Jeremy Corbyn, there's Zara Sultana, there's the pro-Palestinian MPs, people like Ayub Khan and Adnan Hussein, people like Richard Bergen, who are very, very quick to condemn the actions of Israel, and that's okay, and they can do that if they want to, that's fine, who have said nothing, nada, zilch on this one. Yeah,
I never understand this whole, being a passionate advocate for one side and not the other in these horrific situations. I am pro-Palestinian. I believe in a Palestinian state. I abhor the actions of Israel. I am disgusted by the Israeli government, and I regularly have been on protests against the Israeli government. However, I have absolutely no issue doing exactly the same and criticising Hamas, because they're a terrorist organisation. They're monsters. They've committed monstrosities and are absolutely despicable. And I don't believe are representative of the Palestinian people in the same way that any extremist group is representative of a community as a whole. So, I understand people pushing back on certain languages used to try and group people together. However, when you can't criticise the murder of children because it somehow gets in the way of your
boxed yourself in, essentially.
Yeah, of course you have, and it's absolutely ridiculous, and that's exactly what my biggest frustration was working for the Labour Party during that Corbyn era, was the fact that you were finding yourself aligning with people like Russia. When the Skripal case happened, we weren't able to criticise Putin because he was an enemy of our enemies. It made absolutely no sense. You end up in this ideological box where you're unable to try and step out of it and condemn absolutely disgraceful actions. So I think everyone should be able to say, but I will say as well, those who then turn around and say that this should be used as some kind of upholding the Israeli government's actions, where I disagree with them equally.
Okay. James, thank you very much. We'll talk more, including perhaps in a week's time. James Mathewson is a former Labour spokesman. Thanks to everybody who's been in touch, particularly on what's happening in Israel. Zoe in Lancashire says, I think when these hostages are released, Hamas should be obliterated. Pete says, to kill young defenceless children is unforgivable. I would tell the residents of Gaza to rise up and hand over the perpetrators or face total war. I see the people in Gaza as complicit in this horror. They do not deserve peace. Thoughts there from Pete. Why aren't Muslim leaders standing up and condemning Hamas? And quite a number of people getting in touch on this. Jade in Hertfordshire says, thank you for your moral clarity. What I found so disgraceful is that yesterday when the Bebus's babies' bodies were returned, all the mainstream media channels reported it as a fact that they were killed by an IDF airstrike. Now that there is forensic evidence, and Jade, just to add to what you're saying, that forensic evidence has been shared with a lot of other governments around the world. It is factual. Now that there is forensic evidence proving that Palestinian terrorists murdered them with their bare hands, none of the mainstream media are correcting this inaccurate reporting today, so the public are once again misinformed with Hamas propaganda, says Jade in Hertfordshire. John in Kent says, don't forget the footage of the Bebus's capture show people in civilian clothing with weapons, obviously part of the innocent population. Yes, were they Hamas? Were they innocent? Well, they weren't innocent people, but were they people who were supporting Hamas? Were they Hamas terrorists? We don't know. Listen, we're going to talk about this. We're going to take a load of your calls between now and 5 o'clock, and we're going to continue talking about it throughout the programme. It is the biggest story in the world today. We're going to get your views on it in a second. 0344 499 1000.
So a lot of what Trump's saying is straight up untrue. He's either lying or he doesn't care. And for Musk, as someone I admire, you know, Musk is an impressive businessman in many ways. For him to parrot this is an incredibly stupid thing for him to do, because amongst people who know, it just destroys his credibility. Okay. And if we find out that Trump has some really unhealthy relationships with Putin, with the Kremlin, and there's a lot of evidence that he has, it's gonna end badly for Trump and Musk as well.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
John says, how are small nuclear reactors unproven technologies in our submarines? Yeah, I suppose maybe Natalie Bennett meant that it's not actually supplying the electricity grid, but yeah, fair point. Steve said, we've had solar technology for decades, so why haven't new homes been built with panels installed, or industrial estates and public buildings and multi-storey car parks roofed with solar panels? The purchasing power of such demand would have brought the price right down to minimal levels. We wouldn't have to listen to the likes of Miliband either, says Steve. And Brittany in the USA says it seems as if the Labour Party is falling like Jenga blocks. Also a lovely message from Alison that I'm not going to read out because it would be a bit too self-indulgent, but thank you to a lot of people who've said nice things about how we're covering the story and should continue to cover the story, and indeed we're going to now, because Kirsten is in London and is our first caller today, 0344 499 1000. Kirsten, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter. Well, thanks for talking about the Bibas family. I have two kids, less than 10 years, so it's been quite a few days just thinking about that poor family. But, I mean, October the 7th, I used to be of the thought that, why would the UK, the US, and France reinstate, I guess, the country there in the middle of all these people who don't like the Jewish people. That until the October the 7th, and then everything changed to me, because I mean, what they did was just evil. I mean, there's no word. I mean, it's subhuman for me. That's not even. I know one of your guests said it was they're just like us. No, they're not. I'm sorry to say, but they're not. They're subhuman, and all they do is transfer that hatred to the little children who are growing up hating Jewish people.
Yeah, and I think there is a clear moral case. A clear moral case. I mean, there is just a very. I'm not saying, and I've never said, that the Israeli government or state is a perfect state. Absolutely not. Exactly. It's not a perfect government. There are loads of Israelis who think that too. There are loads of Israelis who are protesting against Netanyahu, against some of the people in his government and so on. But I agree with you. I actually visited the Middle East. I've said this before, but I visited Israel. I went to the West Bank. I went to the Gaza border. That was about sort of 6 or 7 years ago. And I sort of thought, at that stage, I thought, well, if you take a line on this, you're sort of part of the problem. And then I thought, well, no, actually, the 7th of October, I often sort of slightly with black humour say that Hamas radicalised me, because they radicalised me against them. Because it's so clear. It's so clear to me.
I have friends from Muslim friends. Yeah. I have friends from Jewish faith. I am a Catholic. And we all can get along together. We can all sit at the same table eating not the same food, but eat and not be offended. Yeah. And the problem is really who's in charge. The people who are in charge are the problem. They don't want.
But it is that. People. But it's also certainly in many of these cases in Gaza as well. I mean, there are civilians in Gaza who are going along with this. There are people standing on the sides of the roads.
That's what I have kept telling my friends. Really, Like, and here, I wasn't born in Britain. I am a British citizen now, but I was horrified to see all these people, the parents of my children's friends, going into those quote-unquote Palestinian marches.
Yeah.
That was supporting a terrorist attack.
What sort of conversations did you have with them, Kirsten?
No, we didn't because when my son entered the school, I would have said that it was 80% white and mixed children. I am Honduran. My husband is white British, so they might not look very Hispanic, but they are half.
Yeah. Okay.
So I would have said that when he entered the school when he was 3, he was again white and mixed and European. I would have said 80%.
Yeah.
By the time that we pulled them out, we pulled them both out, and we have them now in a Catholic school because of the harassment that they went through at 4 and 6.
Wow. I'm so sorry to hear that, Kirsten. That's
yes, I mean, my 4-year-old wouldn't eat meat for weeks because she was being told by her friends that she was dirty from eating meat and pork in particular, right?
Wow.
I understand why their parents would tell their kids, but just like I tell mine, you don't tell your friends what to do. They have their parents. I would expect that same respect back.
Very, very interesting, Kirsten. We've gone in a couple of different directions in that call, but very, very interesting, and thank you for it. John and Crewe, let's see if we can get John in before 5 o'clock. John, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Thank you, Peter. You've got me here. Listening to your programme today makes me think back to when I was very young, when we were at war when I was born with Germany, and it was well publicised. We had a raid of the dams in the Ruhr in Germany, led by Wing Commander Guy Gibson, the dam busters, and they gave no warning. We were at war, so they didn't warn anybody, and it resulted in thousands of people being killed during those raids.
Yeah.
It included many of the people that were in the Lancaster bombers as well, obviously. They risked their lives. Today, having watched the BBC all my life, if they were reporting on the Dam Busters raid, they would want Guy Gibson on trial for genocide. They would report it as though the real problem was the British at war for fighting back against evil. And that is exactly what the Israelis are doing. They have no option but to do what they've been doing, but the BBC get the impression that they are the problem. In actual fact, everything they do, they twist.
Well, there are definitely some good bits of the BBC. It's not all every single news story. But John, listen, thank you for your thoughts there. We're going to continue to talk about the BBC. We haven't even really got into that story because there's so much to talk about in regard to what's happening in Israel. But we will do that next because we'll continue to reflect what's happened in this horrendous Hamas terrorist action and what they have done to the Bibas family, but also this documentary that the BBC have pulled. We're going to talk to Lance Foreman in just a second on that. Want to get more of your calls, texts and tweets and thoughts on that as well. 0344 499 1000.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. It is an absolutely awful day. We have one story dominating our programme for over 3 hours, and that is what has happened to the Bibas family in Israel. The father, Yarden Bibas himself, was abducted, was taken as a hostage by Hamas. Now we know, and yesterday what was meant to happen was that his wife's corpse, she was murdered by Hamas terrorists, and those of their two young sons, a 4-year-old and a 9-month-old, were meant to come back. We know that the two young boys' corpses came back, and we know from forensics information that the Israelis have made public that those boys were strangled and beaten to death. It is just absolutely horrendous. And also, to add insult to injury, that Shiri Bibas, the mother's corpse, is not her. It's not her. Hamas sent the wrong corpse back. That is just horrendous psychological torture. We also know that what we're discussing, a number of other stories today, including the fact that the BBC has had to pull a Gaza documentary from the iPlayer. Let us know your thoughts about all of that. 0344 499 1000. There are other stories we're talking about today as well, including Ukraine. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the sport. We will certainly talk about Sadiq Khan as well and what he's doing to motorists in London. But the main story is about the Middle East. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me at 72222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. There are quite a few people getting in touch, and we're going to talk to Lance Foreman in a second, but let me just give you a flavour of what our viewers and listeners are saying, because a lot of people are getting in touch simply to say thank you for covering this story and thank you for keeping the focus on the story, because a lot of the other media are not. They're talking about other things. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Obviously it's up to those media to do what they want, but we do what we want here at Talk, and this is the biggest story in the world today. This person says, words fail me. The treatment of those beautiful baby boys and their mother by Hamas is unspeakable. It makes me sick to my stomach. Where are these pro-Gaza MPs on this? They have no place in the government of the UK or our society. Any further pro-Palestinian marchers should be arrested, lose their university place if applicable, and if possible, deported. A number of other measures, a number of other people in touch about this, including David in the Cotswolds, who says, good afternoon, Peter. The idea behind terrorism is to terrorise. By murdering these two babes in arms, by murdering their mother, likely the children in front of their mother, by not even returning the mother but returning an unknown woman, is the pure definition of terrorism. The world, and importantly this country, should know that Hamas are terrorists, pure terrorists, says David in the Cotswolds. Well, earlier today, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, gave his reaction to this.
These perfect children, again, were 4 years old and less than 1 year old when the Hamas savages snatched them from their mother's arms. She fought like a lioness to protect her boys. Just imagine their horror. Imagine their confusion. Perfect little children who never hurt a soul. A baby, for the love of God. They languish in captivity until Hamas murdered them in cold blood. Who kidnaps a little boy and a baby and murders them? Monsters, that's who. These Hamas monsters also cynically refused to bring back the boy's mother, Shiri, and sent the body of a Gazan woman instead, in brazen violation of the agreement. Today, the heavens shake. The entire civilized world should condemn these horrific murders. The entire civilized world should join Israel in demanding the immediate release of all the hostages. All of Israel is united in grief. And as the Prime Minister of Israel, I vow that I will not rest until the savages who executed our hostages are brought to justice. They do not deserve to walk this earth. Nothing will stop me. Nothing.
More detail was again given by a spokesman for the Israeli Defense Force, the Israeli Army, Daniel Hagari. He said terrorists murdered the children.
Following a forensic examination, we can confirm that baby Kfir Bibas, aged just 10 months old, and his older brother, Ariel, aged 4, were both brutally murdered by terrorists while being held hostage in Gaza, no later than November 2023. These two innocent children were taken hostage alive together with their mother, Shiri, from their home on October 7, 2023. Contrary to Hamas's lies, Ariel and Kfir were not killed in an airstrike. Ariel and Kfir Bibas were murdered by terrorists in cold blood. The terrorists did not shoot the two young boys. They killed them with their bare hands.
They strangled them and they beat them to death. 10-month-old baby, 4-year-old child. That's what happened. Lance Foreman is a former MEP and a businessman and is with me now. Lance, your reaction to this?
Well, it's the whole thing is completely nauseating, but you know what makes me really angry? Because, you know, we expect this of Hamas. They're a terrorist group and, you know, you expect evil from terrorists. But what really frustrates me and annoys me is that even though two baby boys or a baby boy and a toddler have been strangled to death with bare hands and then they had their bodies mutilated, even following that, the BBC cannot bring themselves to call the murderers of those boys terrorists. It's a stain on Britain. It's absolutely shameful. And you know what? The BBC have got, you know, they need to be investigated because this is not new. This has been going on for a long time, even before October the 7th. The BBC have been delegitimizing Israel. They've been a mouthpiece for Hamas for years now. And quite frankly, I think they should be investigated under the terrorism laws.
Really? As seriously as that, Lance?
Yes, as seriously as that. Because Hamas know that for them to succeed as an organization, it's all about PR. That's why they do this. Why do you think they put children in front of them as human shields? They do it because they do it with the complicity of journalists at the BBC.
Well, let's talk about that, and let's just remind ourselves of the flip-flopping of the BBC over the past few days over Gaza, how to survive a war zone. Just hold your comments just for a second, Lance, because I'm just going to go through these statements, and this is on the documentary Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone. They're all over the place. Wednesday, Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, a documentary showing the conflict through the eyes of 3 children in Gaza, was produced in line with BBC editorial guidelines, and the BBC had full editorial control. Full editorial control. The film told the children's own stories, showing viewers their direct experiences of living through a war, and the children's parents did not have any editorial input. As the BBC has previously explained, the film was edited and directed from London, as independent international journalists are not allowed into Gaza. The film gives audiences a rare glimpse of Gaza during the war, as well as an insight into the children's lives. It hears the voices of other Gazan civilians, several of whom voice anti-Hamas sentiments. Let's go to Thursday. Since the transmission of our documentary on Gaza, the BBC has become aware of the family connections of the film's narrator, a child called Abdullah. We've promised our audiences the highest standard of transparency, so it's only right that as a result of this new information, we add some more detail to the film before its retransmission. We apologise for the omission of that detail from the original film. The new text reads, the narrator of this film is 13-year-old Abdullah. His father has worked as a deputy agriculture minister for the Hamas-run government in Gaza. The production team had full editorial control of filming with Abdullah. We followed all of our usual compliance procedures in making of this film, but we had not been informed of this information by the independent producers when we complied and then broadcast the finished film. The film remains a powerful child's eye view of the devastating consequences of the war in Gaza, which we believe is an invaluable testament to their experiences, and we must meet our commitment to transparency. Friday, day 3 of the flip-flopping. Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone features important stories we think should be told, says the BBC, those of the experiences of children in Gaza. There have been continuing questions raised about the programme, and in the light of these, we are conducting further due diligence with the production company. The programme will not be available on iPlayer while this is taking place. So they've taken it off the iPlayer, which is what they should have done on day one. In fact, it shouldn't have been made in the first place because there were clear biases from that. Lance, your reaction to all of that? I know I've read a lot of statements, but it just shows how the BBC press office is all over the place on this and has been for 3 days now. Just tell the truth from the start.
Well, that's right. They're lying through their teeth, Peter. You know, the BBC are covering up what they knew all along. There's no way they followed their compliance procedures. Otherwise, they would have known that this boy was the son of a Hamas leader. You know, they say they have compliance procedures. You know, he was a child. Did they have a chaperone for this child?
Well, I also want to know how you can have full editorial control of something that you're not on the ground filming. That's also what I want to know.
Look, the whole thing is a complete and utter pack of lies. They knew what they were doing, and they were justifying the actions of Hamas. And under the Terrorism Act, that is a criminal offence. People need to be held to account in the BBC.
Are you honestly sorry? I just want to be clear here.
Yes, I
Lance.
am.
Okay,
I am.
You think BBC bosses should be questioned under the Terrorism Act? I mean, that's a very strong statement to make, Lance.
It is a strong statement because this has been going on for 20 years. You know, they say that they have a commitment to transparency. 20 years ago, Peter, they did an internal investigation. It's called the Balin Report into anti-Israel bias. This report has been covered up for 20 years. They've never, ever released it. They spent £500,000 in a court defending the fact that it should never come to light. They've been playing this game for too long now. We now have, we have anti-Semitism in the UK and globally at the highest levels we've seen since the 1930s, okay? And a lot of this has been stimulated by the media, in particular by the BBC, because the BBC have so much international credibility that if they do it, others can do it too. BBC Arabic pumps out anti-Semitic, conspiracy theories day after day. The BBC need to be held to account, and I think that what we've seen just in the last few days is really, it's the final straw.
Okay.
There needs to be serious action taken.
Okay, Lance, thank you. That's Lance Foreman there, who is a former MEP. He's also a businessman. The BBC, I'm sure, would deny all of that. We've read out their statement there. There have been numerous reports that have been out there by various organisations externally and so on in regard to the BBC. What I know and what I see when I watch the BBC, for example, was a few weeks, I think it was last week, they had hostages exchanged. Well, no. Hamas terrorists took hostages and there were prisoners, many of whom had committed horrendous crimes, not innocent hostages that were being given over. And yes, there was an exchange, but there wasn't a hostage for a hostage. Sometimes, look, the process of news is not straightforward or easy, but I think I wouldn't go as far as Lance, but I think there is a case to be answered here. Sarah has given me a ring from Cheshire. Sarah, you're very welcome to the programme. What do you make of this?
Thank you. What I want to say is that I find it quite shocking that there is this claim that the BBC is biased. I don't think they are, actually. Mint Press News, they actually carried out an investigation and found that the BBC's senior editor at the Middle East desk at BBC is actually a former employee of the CIA and was working as a collaborator with Mossad.
Okay, well that's a very, very strong allegation, Sarah, and we distance ourselves from that. Yep. Sarah, sorry, I'm going to have to take you off. You're trolling people. You're making very strong allegations against people, and you're saying things that we completely disassociate ourselves from. And I'm not familiar with those allegations, and I'm sure that person would completely deny that. Mary we'll get to that in a second, but we will continue this conversation after the break here on Talk.
Musk has jumped on the bandwagon now and claims Zelensky runs a fraud machine feeding off the dead bodies of soldiers and is despised by the Ukrainian people. Is he?
No, not at all. His approval ratings still sit comfortably above 50%. We're in a very strange place where we have the White House nakedly parroting Kremlin disinformation lines. It's a genuinely scary and terrifying time. This could go so horribly wrong, ending in a greater conflagration than we're even seeing now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to everybody who's been in touch on a range of topics, quite a lot on Gaza, of course, and Israel, but one on James Mathewson as well, Nicola from Norfolk, who says, James Mathewson saying that making a fuss about ministers lying on CVs is what the Tories and the Daily Mail do is a bit rich. If the story is about Tories, then Labour will be screeching from the rooftops for scalps, yet when they dismiss it as nothing to see, it's totally hypocritical, Nicola in Norfolk says. Ben in Plymouth says, hi Peter the legend. You can call me that anytime you like. I never agree with James Mathewson, but at least he owns his beliefs, says Ben in Plymouth. And yeah, look, this station is about all sorts of different beliefs, and people, we're the home of free speech, and that includes people you disagree with. Susan says, the Labour man you've just had on, you've been talking to, James Mathewson, said that Nigel Farage has been to America quite a lot. How many days has Keir Starmer been out of the UK since becoming Prime Minister? Hashtag never hear Keir. Brad in Cambridge says, I understand your position regarding the BBC, but personally I loathe the corporation. The BBC seems to stand for everything that I'm against, says Brad, and I really object to being forced to pay for something I morally and philosophically disagree with. Mark in Suffolk says, regarding the BBC, they knew exactly what they were doing. It's because they believe they're right. Their contempt for anything other than their far left view of the world is ignored. I can't stand the fact that I'm forced to finance this nonsense through a state-sanctioned tax to watch live broadcast regardless of the broadcaster. Even more galling is that I seriously don't watch anything broadcast from the BBC. Well, I quite like The Apprentice. John in Rugby says, hi Peter, I agree with Lance Foreman. The vile and toxic BBC should be investigated and closed down for good. A disgusting organisation. End it now, says John. John, I don't agree with you. I don't think everything about the BBC is wrong. I do think they need to take a look at their editorial standards in regard to this documentary and more generally on Gaza. But listen, we're going to continue to talk about this as time goes on between now and 7 o'clock. But what I want to talk about now is in regard to Ukraine. There's quite a lot going on here today, and we know that Sir Keir Starmer has been urged to call out Donald Trump because Starmer will see Trump on Thursday next week in Washington. We know that Macron is going on Monday as well, and the Lib Dem leader Ed Davey says the Prime Minister must speak honestly and openly. Well, Hamish de Bretton Gordon is a former British Army colonel and a chemical weapons expert, and I want him to react to that, but also that the former head of the army says the UK and Europe must step up over Ukraine. This is moving all the time. It's perhaps not moving quite as quickly today as it has on other days, Hamish, but what should the message be from the United Kingdom on Thursday next week, do you think?
Hi, good afternoon, Peter. Well, absolutely. You know, Keir Starmer, as you say, has got to call things out when he sees Trump next Thursday. I mean, Trump is talking so many half truths and lies at the moment. You know, calling Zelensky a dictator, blaming Zelensky for the destruction of his country, and not putting the blame for the illegal invasion of Ukraine onto Putin himself. So I think, you know, whatever game he's trying to play here, Trump tells us how brilliant and clever he is, but he seems to be making some pretty strange and stupid decisions at the moment that, you know, it would appear that Trump is playing him rather than the other way around. Now, there must be some deep thinking, no doubt, behind what Trump is saying. And, you know, I think basically he's saying that Europe, you know, no longer are we going to guarantee your defense and spend billions of US dollars, US taxpayers' money defending Europe if you're not doing it yourself. And I think, you know, General Nick Carter saying that we need to step up is absolutely right. This government and the last government have paid lip service to the defence of this country, and quite frankly, it's their number one priority. So they've got to do it. But whatever game Trump is playing at the moment, unwittingly, he's handing all the advantage to Putin. So hopefully Starmer can convince him to be a bit more proactive. It seems the whole thing for Trump is about this deal over rare earth minerals that Ukraine has a hell of a lot of, and Trump wants his hands on. But I think Trump, fair enough if that's what it takes for US to keep supporting them. But at the end of the day, some of the decisions and some of the comments he's making, potentially costing lives.
Although he is talking about ending the war, which so few people have been talking about. He's said as well that Zelensky has no cards to negotiate with. What should peace look like? Because that is often the criticism that actually that conversation hasn't been had enough in the last 3 years. And some people might say, imperfectly, at least a discussion about the end of this suffering from the Ukrainian people is now actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter, you're right. Everybody wants a peace in Ukraine. 1 million Russians have died. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have been injured. So absolutely want a peace. But it must be a peace that is, in Ukraine's best interests. What's been offered at the moment, I can see why Zelensky is thinking, crikey, well, I can't throw it all away now. And also at a point where, there is the potential for, Ukraine to prevail. The Russian army, as I say, approaching 1 million casualties. Their economy is in desperate situations. So, yeah, we all want peace, but it's got to be a peace that will endure. And I absolutely agree that Britain and NATO, European NATO countries, have a key part to play in a peace enforcement type force on the ground.
Well, let's talk about that actually, because Starmer certainly and other parties as well have been talking about British boots on the ground as part of some sort of peacekeeping force. Do you agree with Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, that perhaps we're getting a little bit too far ahead in thinking about that, or actually is now the right time to plan for that, given that the peace negotiations are underway?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We've got to plan for it and get it up and running. This won't happen overnight. If they decide, if there is a peace deal and a ceasefire signed in the next few weeks, it'll still take weeks, if not months, to get this force into position. So if we don't plan, and I hope that people are working very hard in Whitehall and around European countries to make sure the planning is in place. I've been giving a brief to North Macedonian military leaders and political leaders today, which is a very new and small NATO country who are very keen to get involved and help. And, they are looking at what they can do, and exactly we should be doing the same. So hopefully once the ceasefire is signed, that this force can get in as quickly as possible, because it needs to be a force that when, Putin looks at it, he'll think, I'm not going to transgress because I'll get a real bloody nose here. But we've talked about the position of the British military now. If we are going to lead it, it's going to need a lot of time and a lot of investment over the longer term. But yeah, absolutely plan and get ready to do it. We don't want to then have to wait a couple of months for the force to get in place once the decision has been made. And let's hope for the best, plan for the best, plan for the fact that that Trump can produce the ceasefire that he's been talking about for so long, and now it's up to him to really prove that he's as good as he is. Says he is.
How realistic? I mean, Zelensky has been tweeting in the last few minutes, and he said that essentially that security guarantees must be in place before peace talks actually begin. Couple that with what Trump is saying about the fact that Zelensky, or his belief, I should say, that Zelensky has no cards. I mean, is Zelensky in a position to make demands? And similarly, do you think he's actually, well, I presume you agree that he has been weakened by Trump over the last few days, not Putin, but Trump over the last few days, in regard to Zelensky's own position to negotiate even before these talks properly start?
Well, yeah, a couple of things there. Yeah, I do absolutely think that Zelensky's position has been weakened because Trump seems to be siding with Putin, which is, almost unexplainable. But then he's probably a lot cleverer than I and a lot better at doing these. You
don't understand the five-dimensional chess that is going on in Donald Trump's mind, Hamish, clearly.
Absolutely right. But, I'm sure he'll get there in the end. But we do need peace guarantees. And I think what Zelensky wants to know is that there is going to be this sort of European-led NATO force that will go in there to guarantee the peace. And unless that's on the table before we begin, then, then I do see that the peace guarantees are needed. So all these various blocks are required so that the sides, and I think Ukraine has got to be part of it. Trump has been saying recently, that the Americans will just negotiate with the Russians. Well, if the Ukrainians don't agree, and Zelensky appears to have a lot of support in Ukraine, despite what might be coming out of Washington. So unless Zelensky and Ukraine agree to a deal, it's not going to happen. But we need those peace, those commitments in now, so that they can go and discuss this with a chance of success. So I am still confident. All that's been happening at the moment and all that's been saying, as you say, it's five-dimensional chess. If we don't understand what Putin's up to, then perhaps Trump is maybe he is ahead of the game, and let's hope he is, and let's hope he can deliver this peace that he's been talking about for so long.
Hamish, thank you. Hamish de Breton Gordon there, former British Army colonel. He's also a chemical weapons expert. We didn't actually talk about that, but it's a fascinating fact about him nonetheless. We're going to take your calls in the next segment, and you can give me a ring at 0344 499 1000 if you want to get your call on the air. Quite a few people have done that today, mainly talking about the Bibas family and Hamas, but if there's anything you want to talk about, you just let me know, or things you think we should be covering. Chris in Newbury, for example, says, where were the military when the government were giving away our energy security to Russia and China? They were in their Whitehall offices employing DEI leaders, diversity, equity, inclusion leaders, and banning white men from being RAF pilots. The military is now run by useless idiots who I wouldn't give another penny to, says Chris in Newbury. Lots more opinions coming your way in just a minute here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to everybody who has been in touch, including Ben in Bristol. Ben, you are very welcome to the airwaves. 0344 499 1000 is the number that Ben has called. You can too. Ben, go ahead.
Oh, hi, Peter. Great show.
Thank you.
This is a solemn day and a sobering day. These horrors from Israel, these poor kids. I've seen the videos. People don't watch them. If you go, these people who go on these Free Palestine marches should be forced to watch the videos of what happened on March.
There's a lot of willful ignorance. in this debate.
They should be forced to see these horrors. They line these kids up. They shoot their parents in front of them. They've kidnapped these babies. They've kidnapped these young kids. They don't know their parents are alive. They're messing about. They do this sadistic charade with releasing the hostages like it's like a quiz show game or something. These people are savages. But there's a bigger problem for me in this. Why do we keep doing this and saying it's Hamas, it's Hamas, it's Hamas? It's like an alcoholic who says it's the alcohol. This is a Palestinian problem. This is a problem by the media and the world saying it's Hamas, as though these Palestinians are like these ever so sweet, innocent sort of people under these rulers. We are enabling this savagery.
It's not all Palestinians. You're absolutely right.
It's a lot of them. I mean, every Hamas member, I hate to break it to you, what country do they come from? They're Palestinians.
Yeah, of course. But at the same time, you know, there are many innocent civilians in Gaza who have been killed as a result of this war. But what I think the point you're making is, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Ben, but what I think you're saying is that, as was the case where I'm from in Northern Ireland, you know, it wasn't just the people who were the terrorists. It was the people. It was essentially the people who were the water that the fish swam in. You know, they couldn't swim without the water. They couldn't. They could. You know, you needed people to help with storage of arms. You needed people to help the terrorists. You needed supporters. Those people along the roads, for example, who, when the coffins were going past, the children they brought out, shouting and cheering. Those are perhaps not fully paid up members of Hamas, but there are people who support them. And these organisations can't exist without support.
You can't. For a nation to mature, it has to take responsibility for its choices and who it's become. They need to look at what have we become as a people. Whatever they feel was done to them by Israel, maybe they've got a bit of a case. But they brought all this on themselves. They're lucky they don't drop a nuke on them for what they did on.
Well, I think that would affect a lot of Israelis as well if they did that. But Ben, thank you for your thoughts. I really appreciate that. Danny is in London and has given me a ring as well on the same number, 0344 499 1000. Danny, you're welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Thank you. On the terrible events of yesterday, I still can't believe how a government let these thousands of Palestinians march. I mean, when they're safe in the river to the sea, we know what they're saying. They don't want Israel. How can we let them do it? If it was the other way round, God forbid, a million times, going against certain people, he would say, well, these far-right thugs, they got to be stopped. So how does he let them do it in the streets of London? Well, please explain.
The problem is, as well, it's bigger than that. It's not just Palestinians who are marching in London and other parts of the UK as well. It's people who have solidarity with the Palestinian cause. And if that's your belief, that's fair enough. What isn't fair enough is to be pro-Hamas. And if I don't know about you, Danny, but if I was part of a march and there were people who were saying that terrorism was okay, I would very, very swiftly not be part of that march.
Correct. But we let them do it, don't we? Why do we let them do it? Why?
Well, I mean, I personally believe in freedom of speech. I believe in freedom of expression. I believe marches should be allowed to take place. But I also believe that the police need to be far, far better at arresting people who are excusing terrorism. And anybody who is chanting from the river to the sea, which is a very clear anti-Semitic slogan, I would arrest those people as well for religious hatred.
Thank you very much for your view. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Danny. Good to talk to you. George is in Cumbria. George, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter.
Hi there.
Lovely to speak to you. I would just like to get across one point initially. People that are protesting, whether it be in London, Birmingham, or Liverpool, Manchester, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dublin, they're protesting for terrorists. Let's have it right. The protests are for terrorists. Now.
Oh, you still there, George?
I'm still here. Yes.
Go ahead.
I do apologise.
Do you want to just take a second? Just take a second, switch your radio off, and then we'll come back to you, George, I promise. Let's go to Jay now in Essex. We'll come back to George in a second, but let's go to Jay in Essex.
Oh, hi, Peter.
Hi there.
I echo everything that's been said about the horrendous actions that we've heard about today.
Thank you.
But I wanted to mention about the lawyers and the judges that are now on their sort of knees saying, oh, we've got to allow the people from Gaza over here. No, we can't allow it. We can't allow them to bring that war to our shores. And they take an oath. The lawyers, solicitors, the judges all take an oath. And I've looked it up a little bit, but it's very involved. But integrity is in all of it.
Yeah.
And I think someone ought to remind them of the oath that they are taking. They have to put British people first. We can't allow them to bring over people and say, oh, they're all poor little people that have nothing to do with it. The scenes that we've seen today of them all cheering, and it's just absolutely disgusting. And our lawyers and our judges need to be brought up to what we think.
And Jay, I think that you've got good points there. The other thing I would say is about Ireland. The Republic of Ireland is one of the most pro-Palestinian countries in the world. And when they were told, or asked anyway, to take in Gazan refugees, what did they say? No, we can't. We can't do that.
Same as Egypt and Jordan. They don't want them because they know the problems. And our judges need to be told in no uncertain terms, your job is to put British people first and keep them safe.
Okay. Jay, thanks for your thoughts. Appreciate that today. Let's go back to George. George, you were cut off in your prime there. What were you saying there?
I do apologise.
No problem.
I was a loudspeaker. I'm watching the internet as well. No, what I was trying to get across to you was the fact that we've got in major cities in the United Kingdom, whether it be in Ireland, Scotland, Wales or England, these people are protesting in their thousands. With pro-Palestine flags. And, hey, now come on. If you want to protest. And I would hate the fact if we lost the right to protest.
And that's actually one of the things that sets us aside from somewhere like Gaza. Try going on a protest march in Gaza talking about, I don't know, women's rights, for example. You probably won't get too far.
Of course. Now, what baffles me is this. Now it's all safe over there now. The ceasefire, right? Why aren't these people that were so beloved of this Palestine, why can't they go to Jet 2, right, and get a £49 flight and go over there and help the cause? But they won't do that. Instead, they're sat now still in England protesting, in my opinion, for nothing.
Yeah. Well, George, those are very interesting points that I think a lot of people will agree with, so thank you for them, George. That was George in Cumbria there. Janice is in Essex. Janice, you're welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Oh, hi, Peter. I haven't spoken to you for a long time.
Well, it's good to talk to you again.
I'd really like to say, are people going to go out and protest this weekend? After watching what I've watched, I was absolutely shocked to my core about how they were parading around babies' bodies that they dug up, put them in a coffin, they locked them, they didn't give them the key. Please tell me that people are not going to go out and I'm going to go and say, I felt sorry for them, but I don't anymore, because I think what is going on is look, I've had sympathy for them, but what I saw shocked me to my core, and I'm losing sympathy for them.
It's a level of barbarism, Janice, that I think is hard to contemplate, actually. And we're talking about this today. We're talking about Yarden Bibas, who is alive. He is the father of a family. His wife was taken as hostage, as were their two young sons, Ariel and Kafir. Ariel was 4, Kafir was 9 months, and we know that the 4-year-old and the 9-year-old boy were strangled and beaten to death by Hamas terrorists. We know his wife, Shiri, was also murdered. The body that came back of the 2 little boys is them, and that's why we know what happened to them, because forensic testing that has happened, the Israelis have done that, they've shared it with lots of foreign governments. It is a fact. Shiri Bibas, the body the Hamas terrorists sent back wasn't her. This is to a man, Yarden, who has lost so many in his family. Also his parents-in-law, Jose and Margaret, were murdered on the 7th of October as well. I don't know how he continues. I don't know how he even begins to make sense of this. I don't know how anybody makes sense of a cause that some people support that says that Jews should be murdered and Israel should be eradicated, and the kind of actions that would be taken by people who would strangle and beat to death a 10-month-old baby. I just don't want anything to do with those people. I want quite the opposite. I want to be on the side of the people who are against them, actually. And Israel's not perfect. Absolutely not. There are lots of Israelis who think that. They often protest against their own government. And Israel's a democracy, and there are lots of different views on this in Israel. And we'll continue to represent some of those views here in the UK as well, here on Talk. There's quite a few other things around today, and I just want to reflect those as well as making just one point that Stephen has sent in about this. I've submitted many complaints to the BBC. They always mark their own homework and find themselves not guilty. My last 3 complaints have been against their blatant anti-Semitism, says Stephen, because we're talking about this documentary that the BBC has put out, and have done various flip-flops in regard to whether it was editorially compliant, whether they had full editorial control or not. There are all sorts of things they're saying that don't seem to be consistent. There have been 3 separate statements on that. Mac in Glasgow says, about Ukraine, I can't help but feel that Trump is being controlled by Putin with all the nonsense, unfactual statements he is making. Maybe Putin is something on Trump. Elon Musk's mental state is seriously questionable with his public behaviour over this. My heart, thoughts and prayers to that poor Bibas family going through the hell at the hands of Hamas terrorists. The BBC need to look at the definition of the word terrorist. Great show as usual, says Mac in Glasgow. Mark says, just out of interest, do any of the commentators and journalists actually know what Trump and Putin discussed, or is it all just their own speculation as to what they think might have been said? Jimmy says, I'm a Wales-based barrister and want to comment on the Jonathan Reynolds scandal. It is a criminal offence to hold yourself out as a solicitor when you're not. Reynolds didn't qualify and didn't practice. He can't blame staffers for his own statements on him being a solicitor. He also said it. He said it in the House of Commons himself. He said, when I was a solicitor. The Solicitors Regulation Authority is the most zealous professional regulator in the public sector. Why are they quiet on this? Well, they're not, Jimmy, actually, because the SRA, as you say, let me see if I can find this. This is the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, and they have actually, in tune, here we are, on, they've said today on Jonathan Reynolds, we looked at the issue at the time, we became aware of it and contacted Mr. Reynolds about the profiles, talking about things like on LinkedIn. The materials were corrected and we closed the matter with no further action based on all the evidence we had at the time. However, Jimmy, you'll be interested in this, we've now become aware of further information, so we will look into this. So in fairness to the Solicitors Regulation Authority, they are looking into the apparent misrepresentation of what Mr. Reynolds said. He said he was a solicitor, he wasn't. Lots more to discuss, and we'll get a look at the sport in a minute here on Talk.
You know, Starmer's inability to do anything domestically has now sort of expanded into him being incapable of doing anything internationally as well. I mean, he seems increasingly irrelevant. He's going to see Donald Trump. Nobody knows why. Donald Trump clearly doesn't care whether he sees him or not.
Labour have got a very thin mandate in the United Kingdom. They won on very few votes, all-time record low in terms of number of votes. So there's no love for this Labour government. And then since they've come to power, I mean, they've just made one mistake after another.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Time now to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning £25,000.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Well, there we are. Let's now have a look at the
Sport Summary on Talk.
Uma Gaurav is with us, Talk Sport presenter. Uma, great to have you with us. The Premier League back tonight with Friday night football. What can we look forward to?
You only have a few hours to wait until Leicester host Brentford. That's at 8 p.m. and it is live on talkSPORT, so you can get your Friday night football fix there. And then it carries on into the weekend. Big game tomorrow lunchtime as Everton host Man United. That's going to be the last time Man United are at Goodison Park. Obviously, Everton moving to their new stadium next season. That'll be an exciting one, especially given how Everton are sort of doing quite well at the moment and Man United, as usual, are on the decline. So that's your Saturday lunchtime. And then, of course, in the afternoon, we've got Ipswich against Tottenham. Ipswich actually managed to get their first Premier League win against Tottenham earlier in the season, so can they do the double? We will see.
The pugilists will be in action tomorrow night. There have been some changes to the boxing card, but some massive fights to look forward to. Tell us about this.
Yeah, this has been a very dramatic couple of hours in the world of boxing yesterday night, because what happened was we were meant to see a fight between British heavyweight boxer Daniel Dubois and between Joseph Parker, who's from New Zealand. But what happened was yesterday evening, started hearing whisperings that Daniel Dubois was not very well, and it looked like this fight might be called off completely. And then lo and behold, promoter Ben Shalom steps in and calls up a replacement. I can't imagine what that conversation must have been like. Something like, hello, will you come and fight instead on Saturday evening? Are you free?
I get those calls occasionally when Julie Hartley Brewer's off, sort of say, we need someone to do some verbal jousting. Would you be available?
Yeah, please come and get punched on Saturday night. But it's Martin Bacoli who's stepping in, who's, you know, such a good fighter in his own right. And the good thing is that these guys are heavyweights, so they don't have to adhere to any kind of weight requirements, which is why this fight is able to happen. But it's going to be a huge, huge night of boxing. It's all live on the TalkSport app. There's also a rematch between Artur Beterbiev and Dimitri Bivol, which is a hugely awaited one. So make sure you head to the TalkSport Boxing YouTube channel for all the build up to that as well.
In cricket, the Champions Trophy is underway in Pakistan. England are starting their campaign tomorrow against Australia. Update us on that.
Yeah, this is going to be a really tough opener for England, because obviously Australia won the World Cup back in 2023. They're one of the strongest nations in cricket, as we know. But this format as well, the Champions Trophy, basically what it is, it's a mini cricket World Cup. So the top 8 teams from the last World Cup are thrown into this tournament. And this tournament's returning after an 8-year absence, which is really interesting. And England are seeing this one as pretty important because they're off the back of a really bad series in India where they were completely battered. Brendan McCullum, who's kind of come in as their new coach, he was trying to use this Bazball method where it's all aggressive and about making the players play really free, and it didn't work at all, not in India. So we'll have to see how they fare tomorrow against Australia. The big news is that they've promoted batter Jamie Smith to number 3 in their batting card, and Joe Root drops to number 4. It's an interesting decision, so we'll have to see how that goes because Jamie Smith is relative kind of newcomer, and of course Joe Root, everyone knows how good he is. So whether that decision pays off, we will see tomorrow.
The Lionesses are in action over the weekend as well. Who are they up against?
They're in action tonight as well.
Tonight,
7:45. They are, yes. They're playing Portugal. This is really exciting return for them because we are, of course, now in a European Championship year, just months to go until they fight to defend their crown in Switzerland. That will be in July. But this is where the build-up starts. And Serena Wiegmann, will be looking to put on some strong performances in the Nations League. They've got Portugal today, but then they've got Spain next week. And we all remember what happened last time they faced Spain in the Women's World Cup final, of course. So the Lionesses really need to start putting some performances together. Portugal's a team they should be beating tonight, but you never can say with the Lionesses at the moment. They've had some dips in form, so it's important, I think, that players step up today and everything's to play for because who knows who's going to be on that plane to Switzerland.
Thank you so much. That's Umar Gurav, their TalkSport presenter, bringing us all up to date with everything that is happening in the sport. Thank you to this person who has sent a message in and says, I believe Trump's plan to take over Gaza and rebuild it is a noble idea that could dismantle Hamas for good. The tunnels being used by Hamas will continue to serve as their breeding ground for evil deeds. There is a need for them to be destroyed for good, says this person. Another person says, Jane says, I do not understand how a group of terrorists in Palestine can play with the world like this, and that our politicians can be seen to support the terrorists who murdered a mother and her 2 babies in this way. I'm so sad today. And Gary's been in touch to say Trump is not a fool. His criticism of the Ukrainian president is intended to provoke European leaders into siding with Zelensky and telling the world that they will stand shoulder to shoulder with him come what may. Well, to do that, they're going to have to massively increase defence spending. And what is it that Trump has been asking them to do for some time with little or no success? Is to massively increase defence spending. I've no doubt eventually Trump is going to hammer out a deal guaranteeing Ukraine's future security that Zelensky will sign, but along the way he wants to scare the European leaders out of their complacency and into realising what life would be like if the US walks away from defending them. Interesting thoughts there. Let's get some more from Wasim, who has given me a ring from Manchester. Wasim, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Afternoon, Peter. How are you doing? You okay?
Yeah, Grant, go ahead. Yeah, hi.
Yeah, just on the topic of the unfortunate captives that were returned, presumably dead. I just want to say to you, Peter, you're quite strong. You've got strong opinions about this topic of the babies coming back dead.
Yeah.
But this is the same IDF that came out to the world and said 40 beheaded babies were in ovens, which they physically seen themselves, which later turned out to be a lie.
So the IDF have shared the forensics in regard to these children, Kafir and Ariel, and they are dead, and we know that they were kidnapped, and that shouldn't have happened. Presumably you agree that that kidnapping shouldn't have happened?
Yes, I do agree that, but I will say there's always a but to this conflict, that these people are under occupation for 80 years. Now, just taking off...
Gaza's not occupied.
Little off subject.
Gaza's not occupied, Wasim.
These people was living here for 1945 until the Israelis turned up from Europe. So they was in there.
Well, that's not true, because
it is true, though.
Well, it's not, though, because the Jewish people have been there for thousands of years. Wasim, the Jewish people have been there for thousands of years. It's true.
Okay, but what's the Arthur Balfour Declaration, then?
Okay, you've gone back about 100 years.
Okay.
And you've talked. Just Wasim.
My point was today, Peter, is
okay.
I will not trust these IDF.
You don't trust the IDF. Okay. Well, I don't trust. I am a journalist and I question everything. Do you trust Hamas? Do you trust Hamas when they say that tens of thousands of people have been killed in Gaza?
It's quite obvious. Have you seen the state of Gaza now?
Okay.
They've carpet bombed 90% of it. There's a 90%.
Well, I don't think it's 90%, but certainly it's a lot of it. We agree that it's a lot of it. So why do you believe what Hamas say? But would you believe what Putin says, for example, Wasim?
I don't believe what no one says on media, to be honest with you.
Okay, all right.
I'll do my own investigation and find out, because what I find is the mainstream media have always got an objective to play, like your objective, to talk about these two children when there's probably 10,000 missing under rubble. Forget the dead ones. And do you know what I'm trying to say, Peter?
Well, actually, I don't know what you're trying to say. Wasim, hold on. Are you saying that we shouldn't be talking about these two children who were strangled and beaten to death by Hamas terrorists? No.
What I'm saying is, if you're a human, you talk about all losses of life. You don't focus on two children when there's 10,000 missing.
Well, we're focusing. I have on many occasions spoken about dead children in Gaza. I have on many occasions made it clear that I don't think any of them should die. I really want the innocent people in Gaza to live a peaceful life and for some sort of solution to this to be found. But the story today is this complete and utter barbarism by Hamas terrorists towards these two children, towards a mother who they didn't even give the correct body back.
Can I ask you something? So each living hostage is a playing card in Hamas's eyes, unfortunately. That's how they live around that area. A living hostage in return to get 133 prisoners for. Is that correct? Something along them lines?
Something like that, yeah, you're right.
So a dead captive, they don't get no people for, do they? Or do they?
I don't think so, no. But of course, they're all part of the negotiation in regard to that.
Of course. But what I'm trying to say to you is there's a major chance the IDF, with bombing, whatever they've done in Gaza, have killed these children, unfortunately.
Okay, well, they say that's not true. They say there's forensic evidence, and they have not just put that in and the father agrees with them. Why would the father lie?
So have these bodies come in full bodies, or they're in bits?
I don't know, but what I do know is that they've tested them forensically, they've given the information to other countries, and the father is saying what the IDF is saying is right. Why would the father lie?
The IDF, they've got Israel have got a history going back 50, 60, 70 years of blatant lies.
Okay, why would the father lie, Wasim?
Because they told what he's going to obviously believe what the IDF say, isn't it?
Well, not necessarily. Okay,
he can't do an investigation himself. He's going to have to go.
Okay, all right. Wasim, thank you for your thoughts. I don't think we're going to agree, but I appreciate you giving me a call. There's lots to discuss, including on this story. We'll take your calls as well after the break. 0344 499 1000.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you for your company this Friday evening. It's not often on Drive that all 3 hours, 4, 5 and 6, we do the same story, but this is the biggest story in the world today. It's right that we're discussing it. You want to discuss it too, and I know that a lot of people are appreciative of the fact that we are in a way that some other media outlets are not. This is just the horrendous story in Israel that has happened to the Bibas family. They're just one family that has been victims and gone through the horror of hostages being taken. The father, Yarden Bibas, who is alive and well, thankfully, he was taken as a hostage. He's since been returned. His wife, Shiri, was taken by Hamas terrorists. Their 2 young sons, Ariel and Kafir. Ariel was 4, Kafir was just 9 months old, and there's now forensic evidence to suggest and proves conclusively that the 2 boys were murdered by Hamas terrorists by being beaten and strangled. It is just absolutely horrendous. We know as well that Shiri's parents, so Yarden's parents-in-law, Jose and Margaret, were also murdered on the 7th of October. It's just a dreadful... It's one family at the heart of all of this, and we're continuing to talk about that. There are associated stories, what Netanyahu has said around this, what Hamas have done, what the return of Shiri's body, which then turned out not to be her body. We've had a lot of different aspects to this. We're talking about the BBC as well today because they have pulled a documentary in regard to Gaza, and they've done massive flip-flops in regard to 3 separate statements which contradict bits of the other statements. I want to hear from Netanyahu and the IDF spokesperson. The IDF is, of course, the Israeli army. But I just want to get, before we do that, Jonathan Sakardodi is with us. He's a journalist and broadcast. Jonathan, you're very welcome to the programme this evening. And I know you were listening to what our caller just a minute ago was talking about there. I wonder if you can give me your reaction to what, I think he was ringing us from Manchester, if I remember correctly, and I wonder if you give me your reaction to what he was saying. I had a bit of I wouldn't say an argument, but certainly a disagreement with him.
Yeah, I'm not surprised because he sounds like an idiot. I mean, I know that it's meant to be the home of free speech, but to have unbridled anti-Semites and truth deniers phoning in, people who deny the horrors that happened on October the 7th, the horrors that we saw Hamas carry out. I mean, we saw children dancing on the stage saying they support the ruling regime in Gaza, the very stage which was adorned with a massive picture of the Israeli Prime Minister with vampire fangs and blood dripping from them, on top of the coffins of 2 dead babies that were abducted, tortured and killed, a coffin that was meant to contain their mother but didn't, and a coffin that was meant to contain a man in his 80s who was a peace activist all his life. I mean, what kind of moron does phone up the radio station and embarrass themselves with the racism that guy did? I don't know.
I'm just looking up, I'm sure Wasim would deny that he's a racist. I'm just looking up what you've just...
Most racist would, by the way.
What I'm just looking up what you've just referenced there, Jonathan, in regard to the stage that these coffins were put on. And, you know, as you say, Netanyahu, who was depicted as a vampire, blood and blood dripping from him and all the rest of it. And it was described by the BBC. Once again, there was a stage flanked by huge posters highlighting the catastrophic consequences of Israel's military campaign in Gaza and the Palestinian determination to stay put. That's one interpretation. We'll talk about the BBC more in a second, but before I go back to Jonathan, I just want to hear what Benjamin Netanyahu had to say, Israel's Prime Minister, who talked about the full price that Hamas terrorists will pay as a result of what has happened in the last 24, 48 hours.
These perfect children again were 4 years old and less than 1 year old when the Hamas savages snatched them from their mother's arms. She fought like a lioness to protect her boys. Just imagine their horror. Imagine their confusion. Perfect little children who never hurt a soul. A baby, for the love of God. They languish in captivity until Hamas murdered them in cold blood. Who kidnaps a little boy and a baby and murders them? Monsters, that's who. These Hamas monsters also cynically refused to bring back the boy's mother, Shiri, and sent the body of a Gazan woman instead, in brazen violation of the agreement. Today, the heavens shake. The entire civilized world should condemn these horrific murders. The entire civilized world should join Israel in demanding the immediate release of all the hostages. All of Israel is united in grief. And as the Prime Minister of Israel, I vow that I will not rest until the savages who executed our hostages are brought to justice. They do not deserve to walk this earth. Nothing will stop me. Nothing.
Benjamin Netanyahu there, the Prime Minister of Israel. Also the Israeli Army spokesman Daniel Hagari, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, said, confirmed that Hamas terrorists murdered Ariel and Kfir Bibas and gave some detail about that as well.
Following a forensic examination, we can confirm that baby Kfir Bibas, aged just 10 months old, and his older brother Ariel, aged 4, were both brutally murdered by terrorists while being held hostage in Gaza, no later than November 2023. These two innocent children were taken hostage alive together with their mother Shiri from their home on October 7, 2023. Contrary to Hamas's lies, Ariel and Kfir were not killed in an airstrike. Ariel and Kfir Bibas were murdered by terrorists in cold blood. The terrorists did not shoot the two young boys. They killed them with their bare hands.
Jonathan, every time I hear more about this story and about these two infants, these babies essentially, okay, 4 years old, but basically a baby, and a 10-month-old, I just can't really comprehend the evil, actually. I can't comprehend why a human being would do that to a 10-month-old child or a 4-year-old child. You think with this story that we've been covering in great depth, as I know you have, and you know a heck of a lot more about it than I do, over the past 18 months or so, you think you've got to the bottom of the cesspit, but actually there's a cavern underneath, isn't there?
You know, it is utterly depressing, and Netanyahu is right. The heavens shook, that I must say all decent people shook. But on the other hand, it's not surprising, because sadly we've seen all too many times how Islamic terrorism does treat those it abducts or makes into prisoners, whether it's ISIS chaining people together with explosive necklaces and blowing them up, locking them in a car, blowing up the car, luring cages with people in them into water to drown them. The Yazidi sex slave who was freed from Gaza just a few months ago, after many years, came out and said that she had been forced to eat baby flesh. So the fact that the barbarians of Hamas have acted the way they have should not be a surprise to anyone, except those who maybe have spent the last 16 months or so parading around the streets of Western cities saying that they are somehow freedom fighters, peace lovers, and people who have a legitimate right to, well, anything. Because when you behave like that, you don't have a right to anything except, as Netanyahu said, retribution, and that you won't walk the face of this earth anymore. And I think anybody with an ounce of humanity within them would recognise that, whatever they think of particular details of decades of conflict between the Palestinians who've turned down every possible offer they've been given for statehood, and Israel, which has made peace with every single Arab neighbour that's tried to do so.
It's very interesting that there are a lot of the pro-Palestinian lobby and indeed members of Parliament here in the UK who have a lot of opinions, heck of a lot of opinions, on what Israel does. But so far today, again, probably falling into the category of shocking but not shocking, people like Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana, Richard Bergen from Labour, Ayub Khan, who's an independent, Adnan Hussein, who's an independent, all pro-Gaza, pro-Palestinian MPs, have absolutely nothing to say about what has happened in Israel in the last 24, 48 hours.
Can I just jump in there and say, you know, some of them aren't just pro-Palestinian or pro-Gaza. Corbyn is on record. We have video of him saying that Hamas were his friends, and also in that same event saying that it was a big mistake that the British government classified them as terrorists. That is the man's opinion. So I think it would be reasonable to characterise that as pro-Hamas, because he said all these things in defence of Hamas, trying to say that it shouldn't be classified as a terrorist organisation. Well, I think everybody who's watched what's gone on in the last 16 months, even the last couple of days, never mind since its foundation in the 80s, would know that that's bunkum, it's nonsense. Of course, they're terrorists. So I just think that, all of those people ought to hang their head in shame. They really need to examine why it is they have these ridiculous opinions, why you would defend at all an organisation that does that. And I'm afraid to say that there does appear to be a very strong reason, because they don't do it in all circumstances. They just tend to do it when it's Jews that are being killed and kidnapped and the Jewish state that's being attacked. Suddenly then, the people who are doing the bloodthirsty murdering, raping, kidnapping, rockets, all of that, well, suddenly those people are not so bad. They're your friends, or they're people that shouldn't be classed as terrorists. I think that's deeply suspicious. Says an awful lot about the people who like to defend them.
Another grouping that does not use the word terrorist in regard to Hamas is the BBC, whose international editor, Jeremy Bowen, is not in the Middle East this evening. He's in Kyiv. But nonetheless, he's reporting from there. I just wonder, in regard to the BBC, what you make of the controversial, well, it's more than controversial, Gaza documentary coming off the iPlayer. Just before I get your reaction, this will take a minute, but bear with me, Jonathan. I'm just going to read once more, last time I promise, the three statements which all seem to contradict each other. This is the Wednesday statement. Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, a documentary showing the conflict through the eyes of 3 children in Gaza, was produced in line with BBC editorial guidelines, and the BBC had full editorial control. The film told the children's own stories, showing viewers their direct experiences of living through a war, and the children's parents did not have any editorial input. As the BBC has previously explained, the film was edited and directed from London, as independent international journalists are not allowed into Gaza. The film gives audiences a rare glimpse of Gaza during the war, as well as an insight into the children's lives. It hears the voices of other Gazan civilians, several of whom voice anti-Hamas sentiments. Let's go forward one day to Thursday. Since the transmission of our documentary on Gaza, the BBC has become aware of the family connections of the film's narrator, a child called Abdullah. We've promised our audiences the highest standards of transparency, so it is only right that as a result of this new information we add some more detail to the film before its retransmission. We apologise for the omission of that detail from the original film. The new text reads, the narrator of this film is 13-year-old Abdullah. His father has worked as a deputy agriculture minister for the Hamas-run government in Gaza. The production team had full editorial control of filming with Abdullah. We followed all of our usual compliance procedures in the making of this film, but we had not been informed of this information by the independent producers when we complied and then broadcast the finished film. Didn't you have full editorial control? Isn't that what you said yesterday? Final paragraph. The film remains a powerful child's eye view of the devastating consequences of the war in Gaza, which we believe is an invaluable testament to their experiences, and we must meet our commitment to transparency. Let me bring you up to date to Friday. Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, says the BBC, features important stories we think should be told, those of the experiences of children in Gaza. There have been continuing questions raised about the programme, and in the light of these, we're conducting further due diligence with the production company. The programme will not be available on iPlayer while this is taking place. Quite a lot of verbal gymnastics there.
Yeah, clear as mud, isn't it? All that's clear is that they got caught out making pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian, pro-terrorist propaganda, putting it on our screens using our money. And that is a disgrace. What made it worse was when experts like David Collier, who's made a career out of forensically debunking this kind of trash that the BBC regularly puts out, when they get in touch, after just a few hours after watching it, having done the work that the BBC should have done itself to check who these people were, they reject everything those people say. They rejected the Assassin report. They rejected the academics who made objective AI models that would analyse their material in that report to try to make this something which could help them improve their coverage. They reject everything. They've rejected my complaints over the years because they know better than Jews, especially when it comes to Jews. But never mind Jews. They know better than people who are just simply taking an objective look at things. Now, for anybody who follows that region, especially the PR machine of Hamas and other Palestinian terror organisations, it was blindingly clear watching that documentary from minute one that it looked like the sort of Pallywood fake nonsense that they pump out on Instagram all the time. For decades, Hamas has perfected the art of fabricating reality for the sympathetic Western press, and their use of child crisis actors is particularly effective. It taps into the media's insatiable appetite for emotive, victim-centric storytelling. And I must say that as a journalist, it's your job, it's my job, it's their job, to look at the material they're given and to try and assess from their knowledge of the past and the knowledge of the organisations that are obviously controlling everything that comes out of the Gaza Strip, whether it's real or not. The clue to them could have been that this kid's father is a senior figure in Hamas. The other kid they showed, Zakaria, I think his name was, he was then found out and published in the Telegraph after a Twitter account called Gazawood showed he was shown to have worn a Hamas headband, posed next to Hamas fighters, held a gun, sung songs in praise of Mohammed Deif, the terror leader. These things were out there on the internet for David Collier, Gazawood, to find within one night of the thing being broadcast. And they've been making this for months. So they expect us to believe that they didn't know. And if we give them that benefit of the doubt, and I'm not sure why we should, it means they are completely incompetent.
And remarkably incurious.
Incurious is not the right word, because to be incurious when you're maybe a 5-year-old is one thing, but when you're one of the world's most trusted news brands made with money that's basically siphoned off from the public at threat of criminal conviction, then I think you have absolutely no defence. I think the BBC is in crisis tonight, not just because it put out this terrorist propaganda, but because it also did everything it could do to drag its feet when it was pointed out to them and to pretend that it wasn't a problem. And it should be no surprise that they put out Hamas propaganda, because they've spent the entire time since the war started, when Hamas invaded Israel, when Palestinian terrorists burst over the border and carried out the atrocities, they've spent all that time loudly and proudly obsessing that Hamas are not terrorists. They refuse to use the word. They are terrorists by law in this country. They're terrorists to anyone with a mind who looks at what they do. Just look at that handover of the coffins. And the BBC have been the people at the forefront internationally of saying they're not terrorists. So how could we be surprised when they put out a propaganda film like this that shows the terrorist point of view, that features the son of one of the Hamas terrorists and another little boy who was posing as a paramedic and a journalist's assistant and an ambulance cleaner all in one day? I watched that documentary and I revealed on my X, after David's fine work, that if you just followed the section with that kid, which was billed as being all on one day in reaction to one airstrike at Burej refugee camp, the child in the sequence used had 2 different hair lengths, maybe 3. He had 4 different pairs of shoes during what was meant to be a continuous sequence outside a hospital. Now, that just shows some sort of dishonesty, in my opinion, because when you edit a piece of actuality for news and current affairs coverage, anybody knows that you don't shuffle things around into a different order in order to make it look like something happened that didn't. So I would ask the BBC, why did that happen in their documentary? If I spotted it watching this thing on the iPlayer, I mean, the kid had long hair in one shot and short hair in the other. He had bright blue Crocs on in one moment, then he had black flip-flops in another, then he had yellow trainers, and then he had black sliders on. I mean, it just shows amateur hour in continuity and editing, never mind in news sense and reliability. So again, it's very hard to believe that they didn't know what was happening. Okay. I'd like to hear their defence.
Well, perhaps we will. Jonathan, thank you very much indeed. That's Jonathan Sackerdoody there, who's a journalist and broadcaster. We know the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, has some questions that she's going to ask the BBC as well. Kish in Greater Manchester says, isn't it curious how Wasim, who was on earlier on, just before the 6 o'clock news there, isn't it curious how Wasim contends he does his own research but doesn't actually know a great deal about anything, says Kish. Well, look, I'm glad that Wasim rang in, even though I disagreed with him. Claire says, what a world. It is a depressing world. My mother used to cry at the news. I never understood why. Now I could never stop crying thinking of those babies. I'm not religious and I still pray for them, says Claire. Alice in Belfast says, I'm thinking of the poor little children, but considering the way they died, I feel sick thinking of how the mother died. I'm sure it wasn't quick. I'm just praying they didn't make her watch her babies die, as I'm sure they did, for pure evil, says Alice in Belfast. There are some very strong opinions, very strong emotions this evening, and we're certainly talking through this together, and we will take your calls next here on Talk. If you want to get your call on the air, 0344 499 1000.
if you look at the current opinion polls, the three parties are more or less in a three-way tie. They're all in the sort of the mid-20s%. There are times when Reform tops them, and lately the Reform has been topping them. Other times Labour's been slightly ahead. There's been the odd poll that puts the Conservative Party ahead. All I will say is that we're around 4 years away from a general election, and anything can happen in 4 years. If a week is a long time in politics, I don't know how you would describe 4 years.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
John is in Manchester and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. John, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Yeah, so I mean, you keep on going on about all these things, and I don't want to take A side or B side. Like I said to your producer, I'm going to simply say Israel, especially Netanyahu, has been outplayed in this entire game.
You think Netanyahu's been outplayed? How so?
Yeah. So start with world over or London. Every week you find that weekend these Palestinian rallies go on in London, right? Mm-hmm. All you have seen so far about these hostages was some posters were posted on walls, and that was it. All was forgotten. Why could not Israel fund these kind of rallies? And we would have then seen the support that would have been there. I'm sure you would have.
Well, there have been, John. There have been a number of rallies in support of the hostages.
Not
that
every week. None of the media houses.
You're right, but also a lot of people feel that they make their point through talking about it, by wearing yellow ribbons, for example. Remembering the hostages in other ways, rather than bringing London to a standstill every couple of weeks.
Yeah, but the thing is, that is what sells. That is why you keep on talking about these rallies every single week, every 2 weeks. You keep on talking about it and remind people.
Well, we're talking about it because there's a war on, and there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, but you don't talk about hostages till this deal started. I mean, that's one thing. Second thing
I probably talk, John. I don't know how much you've watched or listened to my. Hold on a second. Hold on a second, John. I'll let you speak in a second. I don't know how much you've watched or listened to my program, but I would honestly suspect that this station, and probably me personally, I'm happy to be contradicted, probably me personally have talked about the hostages more than any other station or set of programs in the UK.
Sure. You speak, but not everybody. But that's
okay.
Second point. Second point about these hostages and not hostages, and the two little children are killed, murdered. I will not even use the word killed, because that's not legitimate. It's murdered.
Correct.
Tortured and murdered is the word to use. Is there. Now, as far as I'm aware, all Israeli adults have to undergo military training.
That's right.
And they are all considered a compulsory military reservists. They may be called to arms any single given day, whether you are a doctor or engineer.
Yeah, that's right. It's up to a certain. I can't remember exactly what the age is, but certainly it's a lot of your adult life. You're in the reserve essentially. Yeah.
Now, bearing little children who were kidnapped, and that should never have been allowed to happen, but it happened, and those elderly citizens who were captured, hostages by Hamas, rest of all, you can say, are your reserve soldiers. All those girls who came out, they were your reservists. Some of them were actually serving soldiers who were captured.
Yes.
I mean, the thing is, these hostage deals, they never work out good for the normal countries, okay? I have relatives in India, and they tell me that there was a guy called Maulana Masood Azhar. He was kept in Indian prisons for very long. Then these guys kidnap a plane, hijack a plane, take it to Afghanistan, and then these guys release this of Maulana Azhar.
Yeah, it's a tactic that's used a lot in conflicts.
This guy comes out, establishes a full-front terrorist organization, and kills far more people. Israel should have come out and said, like Trump said the other day, we are giving you 2 weeks either you release all the hostages, so we consider them market for our country, and we're going to come out and we will make sure that not a single one of your souls survives. Forget about Gaza.
Well, I'm not sure that would have been a good idea either, to be honest, John, because a lot of innocent people would have died.
No, you don't have to kill them. You don't have to kill them. You have to show them that you are prepared to go to that length of considering your citizens to be martyrs. I mean, today, when you keep on talking about this family, I mean, this unfortunate poor family where the husband is alive and the rest of them have been gone, the wife's remains are not even there. To be honest, if I was one of the fellow Israelis whose family is still kidnapped and who doesn't know whether they are alive or dead, I will myself go to that idiot Netanyahu and say, look, I considered my family as killed. So far as you are prepared.
Well, John, I'm not sure you can say that or speak for those people, quite frankly. And there are a lot of very, very differing views from hostage families, and I think it's a bit of a leap to say, well, you know, do what you want. I consider the fact. I mean, I think there's always hope, or there's hopefully some hope anyway. And there are still about 60 hostages who are still being held by Hamas terrorists. Interesting, different perspective from John. Don't agree with all of it, but that's the way things go. Ian is in London, 0344 499 1000. You're very welcome to the programme, Ian.
Peter, we've spoken before.
Good to talk to you again.
Yeah. John, please, bless you, wake up and smell the coffee. Like the whole, you especially, Julia, Mike, Jeremy, Kevin, Alex, you all are fantastic. You all are absolutely incredible in your help for the Israeli nation and the Jewish population. As far as it goes, another very quick thing, what he doesn't understand, if you've got a population of 7 million, which is what they have got in Israel, you've got around you maybe 200, 300 million Arabs and everything else. So, of course, they've got to have a reserve army. They can't keep them all in the army all the time. So they do the service, but they do it because they want to be alive, right?
Yeah,
right. So that's
and there are many countries. Switzerland, for example, you know, famously neutral. You're basically in the reserve for most of your life. It's a fairly common thing. It doesn't happen in the UK, but it happens in lots of different countries.
No, but the main reason my call, you mentioned it at the very, very start. Bergen, Corbyn, Begum, Espina Begum, Sultana. All these MPs and McDonnell, right?
Yeah.
They go on these marches. Now, if I was going to go against, let's say, the French, I would go to the French embassy or the Chinese embassy. But no, they make it, when they go on the marches, they go to the synagogues. Why are they going to the synagogues? It's got nothing to do with Israel. It's because they're specifically going for the Jews. And that's where it does get actually missed. There was a march a couple of weeks ago where you saw McDonnell, Corbyn, I think Sultana were actually
certainly McDonnell and Corbyn near the BBC, near where
they were at St John's Wood. It was
that's right.
Great Portland Street Short Synagogue. Why
centre
are
of
they
London,
going to the synagogue? Because it's not against Israel, it's against the Jews.
It's a very, very, very wise question, and it's good to remind people of that.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I had it with another station once, right, where I said about Corbyn, I was told I was a blinking idiot for saying that Corbyn was an anti-Semite. And this is supposed to be one of the big radio presenters called me on national radio an idiot as a Jew, saying out that Corbyn is an anti-Semite. But that shows you where this country is, unfortunately. The silent majority are now waking up to the reality of what's going on, right? They are. But it's like, as you said in your sort of thing, it's just absolutely incredible how, as he said, yes, if it was me or anybody else, and I can imagine, the control that poor guy, Bibas, the husband, Yardin, right, he must be absolutely, it's like when relatives of mine came out the camps, right, after the war, and my dad sort of in the British Army do it, and they said to him, we are going to survive for as long as we can possibly live to make the Germans realise they cannot knock us out of the world. Right? And if you look at it, most of the survivors from Auschwitz, from Belsen, and you saw it on that programme the other day, right? they were in their 90s, they were in their 100s. And it's incredible. They went through all of that, but they made sure they wanted to live to remind people day in, day out.
And they told their story, and they gave as much detail as they could.
Yeah, to show they weren't going to be beaten. And that's the thing. But unfortunately, as you said, everybody say, why doesn't Israel go in and nuke the lot? They can't.
No, they can't. It's totally impractical, and it would be totally unfair as well on the innocent Gazans as well, and also it would have a huge effect on people in Israel. I mean, you're talking about very, very small geographical areas as well. Ian, great call. Lots to chew over there. I'll be thinking about that call during the break, no doubt. We're going to cover something else in just a second. This is about Sadiq Khan and another attack on drivers. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thanks everybody who has been in touch, including Stephen, who says, "There've only been a few marches against anti-Semitism in London. I'm not Jewish, but I marched on 2 of them. My first march since a march against the Vietnam War." Gosh, that's a little while ago, Stephen. A lot of people took part in those as well. "The people around me were the nicest I have ever met. Please tell Jewish people listening that the majority of decent British people are silently in support." Well, not just silently, Stephen. You turned up. You went there. You went on the march, and you've texted into a national radio and TV programme, and you're not silent. You're not the silent majority. You've said something, and so many people need to do that. They need to demonstrate it as well, and not just be silent, like you, Stephen, following your example. So thank you for that. Jade says, "Stop the Hate hold a counter protest every time the PSC, the Palestine Solidarity Committee, or stage a march in London. However, the UK media is so biased that they don't give the pro-Israeli and anti-Hamas side any airtime, hence why your caller probably only thinks there's one in support. There's only support for Palestinians in the UK," says Jade. Laura says, "I'm sitting here with tears in my eyes. I truly hope the poor mother wasn't put through the hell of watching her totally innocent babies being murdered. Governments around the world need to get off their backsides and do something to get these barbaric Hamas terrorists wiped out." Michelle says, "If the mother of those 2 boys wasn't in the coffin, which was supposed to be hers, is there a possibility she's still in fact alive?" I don't know. I think certainly Hamas have said that she's dead. I don't know. I hope she's alive, but I think that's a vanishingly small prospect, I'm afraid. Mick in Wallington has been in touch and says Sir Mark Rowley must be held to account for the enabling of anti-Semitic marches. He could have controlled it at the beginning, but due to fear, he bottled it, putting Londoners in danger. And Londoners, of course, have Sir Mark Rowley, who is the operational head of the Metropolitan Police. The Police and Crime Commissioner is Sir Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. He's under fire for another aspect, because motorists who breach low-traffic neighbourhood rules or park illegally in London are going to be fined an extra 30 quid. Right, if you, in certain parts of London, if you park on a double yellow line, you get fined £160. £160 for parking on a double yellow line. A lot of these penalties have been up. This Alliance of British Drivers says the increases are unjustifiable. Brian McDowell says a penalty close to £150 does not relate to the effect of the offence. It should be a little more than a ticking off. Let's speak to the motoring journalist Quentin Wilson. Quentin, great to talk to you. These do seem to be a bit high.
I'm as exasperated as you are and your contributors there, with stunning bad timing. The mayor has said he needs an increase in these charges when the country is now talking about growth and that we're all hard up, and it's really difficult. We've got shops and businesses closing all over the place, and they want to raise these amounts to disproportionately high numbers. I mean, your point, 160 quid if your wheel strays into a yellow box junction, which is of course enforced by a hard-hearted camera. Now, it needs to be said that you can pay these fines early and you get a 50% discount.
Still 80 quid. Still a lot of money.
Completely. And it will ruin some people's week where they will not be able to eat because they're going to pay this ticket. So look, those 10 London boroughs that are doing this, over £250 million worth of fine revenue in 23-24 from just those 10 London boroughs. Yet we're told that this isn't enough and they need to put their prices up. I've just got the responses here from the Mayor's office. A spokesman for the Mayor said London, the number of people receiving penalty charge notices increased by 50% over the last 12 years. Might that have something to do, Peter, with the amount of cameras, enforcements, wardens, bus lanes, yellow boxes, or am I just making this up?
It seems to me, Quentin, that the Mayor of London, Sir Sadiq Khan, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner, is really good at putting resources into things that make money, such as penalising motorists, and perhaps less good at stuff about people being stabbed to death, for example, or perhaps robbed or murdered. It just seems to me that the priority is on things that raise a lot of money for his coffers.
Completely. It is all about revenue raving, and there are too many snouts in this trough. And you're absolutely right. I was driving down the Bayswater Road. There is someone, a cop with a gun, 20 miles an hour, getting people. You drive down Park Lane, I see 3 people on those e-bikes in black taking people's phones. Now, the priorities are completely wrong. And here's another response here. Penalty charge notices are a vital way we keep London moving. Well, I've just looked, and the average speed in London is between 7 and 12 miles an hour, and it's noted as they're having the slowest traffic in the world. Well done, everybody.
Yes, no, I think we can give Sir Sadiq Khan a massive pat on the back for that. Quentin, thank you. That's Quentin Wilson there, who's a motoring journalist. And perhaps if you need to pay one of those fines, £25,000 might be helpful. So you can find out now how you could be in with a chance of winning that amount of money.
It's competition time, and we're giving you a chance to win a whopping £25,000. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus 1 standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
people. They want to live in a self-governing country. You know, they don't want to be, you know, moved back into the sort of the supranational bureaucracy of the EU. And actually, I think there's a growing number of people who want to leave the European Convention of Human Rights. You know, I think people want to live in a self-governing national democracy. But I think it's very sad, because I think all over the world right now we're seeing, you know, right-wing governments come to the fore. We're seeing the left, the centre-left collapsing. But at precisely that moment, we're stuck with Keir Starmer and whoever the Labour Party are replacing with for the next 4 years.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you so much to everybody who has been in touch today, and we know that David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, has just tweeted, "The vile killing of the Bibas children by Hamas terrorists is sick and abhorrent, as is the failure to return the body of their mother Shiri to the grieving family. Her body must be returned, the hostages must be released, this nightmare must end." And the Foreign Office, which he heads, of course, as Foreign Secretary, has also demanded the return of Shiri Bibas to Israel following the abhorrent fake handover. Georgina is in London and has given me a ring at 0344 499 1000. Georgina, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
I'd just like to send out my sincere condolences to the Bibas family. It's worse. I haven't even got words of how terrible it is.
It's hard to comprehend.
I just, as a mother myself, you just can't comprehend the grief that poor man must be feeling. Mm-hmm. When I was always told as a child, Peter, and I've since told my children, that there's no such thing as monsters. But I was obviously wrong. Anyone who can take the life of a little baby and his 4-year-old brother with their bare hands whilst looking into their face is as far removed from the human race that you can get. This is the purest form of it. I'm so sorry. I've got a lump in my throat the size of an apple.
I have a lump in my throat listening to you, Georgina, because you are speaking for so many people today. You're vocalising what so many parents feel, and people who aren't parents feel, about these little children, this baby and this toddler, and the thought that there are human beings who could do this.
I'm going to try and finish because I need to say this. This is the purest form of evil, and there's a special place in hell for these people. The people who conducted this act of atrocity and cowardice, with their covered faces to protect their anonymity, because they know if their faces were known, there would be horrific reprisals. I say to them, if you are proud of your cause, and this is what you want people to see, this is what you stand for, take off your masks. Be proud of your fight. We would all love to know who you are. These little babies being murdered is despicable enough to hear about. But when you can put a face to that statistic, it actually makes you ill with grief. What is happening in Gaza must end, Peter. The murder of these innocent babies must stop.
Georgina, thank you for an incredibly powerful call from Georgina there. We'll speak to Georgina in just a second. The producer's going to chat to her, because clearly Georgina is very emotional, and I don't blame her. I don't blame Georgina. Because there's a lot of emotion today. There's a lot of it's constantly horrific what's happening in Israel and in Gaza. There are horrible things happening all the time. We know there's been a ceasefire in the last few weeks, and that's a good thing. But how fragile that is, I think, is something we're going to examine further on my programmes tomorrow. You probably know I'm on tomorrow on Sunday from 10 o'clock, and we're going to talk about that more tomorrow. But what I do know from what Georgina says, I think she just vocalises what so many people have been thinking and have perhaps struggled in some cases to say, rightly or wrongly, that this is just the most horrendous, unspeakable thing. And it takes, sadly, after a year and a half of this madness, barbarism, terrorism going on, it takes something like this, as horrific as it is, to remind us of all the other horror that has been going on and things we will never know in regard to the horrors that have happened in the last 18 months. Lisa is in Cardiff. Lisa, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Good evening, Peter. It's very hard to follow Georgina's call.
She spoke very well, didn't she, Lisa?
She was incredible. But it's a tragic day for all mankind, regardless of race, religion, anything. But what I'm ringing for, we took your, not advice, we watched on the BBC iPlayer last night, We Will Dance Again.
Yeah.
And
it's a tough watch, Lisa. I've watched it myself.
I had my head in my hands the entire time.
Yeah. I should say, just for people who don't know, that We Will Dance Again is a documentary. It's still on the iPlayer, the BBC. Have put it on the iPlayer, and it's about the Nova Music Festival and what happened on the 7th of October. I've watched it previously. I mean, I couldn't watch it in one sitting, Lisa. I had to take a break.
No. Well, we don't even watch BBC. We ditched BBC years ago, but after what you said, I was compelled last night to watch it. For me, I mean, the whole thing was harrowing, but the beautiful girl that clearly had been gang raped and was lying in the truck in a position that showed what had happened to her, and they were laughing. The Hamas were laughing all over her, was just too much to bear. But the Bibas family, going back to that, Peter, the fact they couldn't put the babies' bodies in baby coffins to hide what they'd done, and then to send the wrong body home is like one of your earlier programme callers said about it's like a game show to Hamas. Will send the wrong body home.
And it's psychological torture for
absolutely
so many people. And there are people, you know, there are people who are traumatised by this who simply because they are Israeli, simply because they are Jewish, and they feel a connect, and others, like Georgina, for example. I don't know her ethnic background, but by the way, the producers have spoken to her, and she's okay, which is good. But I thought it was important to let her speak.
Absolutely.
But Lisa,
and a further point, my stepfather, he's like my dad. He was a Holocaust survivor. He died aged 95 4 years ago. He lost his parents and brother in the gas chambers. He would be. I'm glad he's not here. Right? It would absolutely, for him to see and hear what is going on, and anti-Semitism is so rife. And when I go to his grave, I'm almost frightened in case, you know, I might be attacked. You know, it's so... But my heart goes out to all humanity and to the Bibas family and to everyone, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, that we must put this... we've got to end this.
Lisa, thank you. You've spoken really well there, and that's Lisa in Cardiff. Two brilliant women there, Lisa and Georgina, making some really good points. I just want to remind ourselves of what the IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari said about the terrorists who murdered Ariel and Kafir Bibas. These are two children, a 4-year-old boy and a 10-month-old boy, who were murdered by Hamas terrorists who used their own hands, as Daniel Hagari, who is the Rear Admiral, who's the spokesman for the Israeli army, explains.
Following a forensic examination, we can confirm that baby Kfir Bibas, aged just 10 months old, and his older brother Ariel, aged 4, were both brutally murdered by terrorists while being held hostage in Gaza, no later than November 2023. These two innocent children were taken hostage alive together with their mother Shiri from their home on October 7th, 2023. Contrary to Hamas's lies, Ariel and Kfir were not killed in an airstrike. Ariel and Kfir Bibas were murdered by terrorists in cold blood. The terrorists did not shoot the 2 young boys. They killed them with their bare hands.
Thank you to everybody who has been in touch, including Stephen in Bromsgrove, who says something that's not emphasised enough is that 21% of Israel's population is Arab, nearly 2 million. Israel is not a discriminating country. This needs to be said continuously. Well, Steve, I'm sure there are people who disagree with that. I think there are clear cases of discrimination in Israel against some people, including some of the Arab population. But listen, that's something I'm happy to debate at another time. Michelle says, I don't trust Hamas. They're playing evil mental games with the Israeli people. I won't lose hope for the mother until it's officially confirmed by Israeli authorities. And there's some breaking news now, and a man has been seriously wounded in a stabbing at the Berlin Holocaust Memorial. The area has been sealed off. Well, we know that that area is bang in the centre of Berlin. It's near the Brandenburg Gate. In fact, I was there myself a couple of months ago at the Holocaust Memorial. It's been there for some years, and it is a really incredible piece of architecture, and it is, you can sort of walk through it. There are blocks, large blocks that often go down in quite a deep aspect of it. It's sort of carved into the landscape, and it's a very, very powerful and often unexplained, actually, piece of architecture. But what we know is that a man has been seriously wounded in a stabbing at the Berlin Holocaust Memorial. That is the breaking news this evening, and the area has been sealed off. We've just received that information. I'm sure Kevin O'Sullivan will have more on that on his programme. He's on between 7 and 10 this evening, between 7 and 9 here in this studio, and he will be having his programme What Just Happened, which also has Samara Gill and Simon London. That is going to be on between 9 and 10. Just on Sadiq Khan and what he's doing to motorists, Mark in Coventry says, I have to say I'm sick of people moaning about what Sadiq Khan and the fines and stupid rules that he imposed. People should have voted him out. Londoners should have voted him out and not moaned about it now. Well, I know that in Kevin's programme he will be bringing the latest, that breaking news one more time, that a man has been seriously wounded in a stabbing at the Berlin Holocaust Memorial. The area has been sealed off. Kevin, it's good to see you. What's coming up in your programme?
Well, obviously we'll keep everybody updated on that developing story. But we'll kick off with, the latest on Trump, Zelensky, Musk saying that he runs a fraud machine feeding off the dead bodies of soldiers. I mean, they're really racking up the anti-Ukraine rhetoric. But I think the question has to be, Donald Trump, he's appalling everyone with what he's saying, but he is the great disruptor, and he is disrupting now on an industrial scale. And you have to ask the question, what is he really up to?
What do you think he's up to?
I think he's laying the groundwork for peace talks. He will be far more amenable to a compromise than he sounds now.
Okay.
But I could be wrong. I mean, you never can tell with Donald Trump. Said it last night, I'll say it again. It's a cliche, but you have to take Donald Trump seriously, but don't necessarily take him literally.
And Nigel Farage said that yesterday as well.
Yeah, exactly right. It's the wisest thing ever said about Trump. You never can tell. This Sri Lankan paedophile, ridiculous, allowed to stay because of the European Court of Human Rights. Of course, he did 4 years for paedophile offences. This is getting.
Why can't we send him back to Sri Lanka? What's the ludicrous excuse this time?
Because apart from being a paedophile, you have to make this distinction. He's also gay. And because he's gay, he says that he will be persecuted back in Sri Lanka. Therefore, Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights will be contravened.
Oh, right. Well, we can't have that.
Yeah.
Obviously, his child victims have no rights, and we don't care about them.
It's just ridiculous.
Unbelievable.
Let him stay here and remain a standing danger to British kids. Isn't that one? This has got to stop. This is
it doesn't make any sense. It is just
getting
horrendous.
ridiculous.
And also, maybe he should have thought about that before he committed crimes.
Absolutely.
You've got to lose some of your rights when you